Hope you guys are doing well out there in TikTok land. Today we are going to be discussing the news, discussing what's going on in the world, discussing the collapse of capitalism, discussing the ridiculous nature of all of the things that we are all experiencing. If you are experiencing existential trauma, you have come to the right place. If you are experiencing Matthew Boucher, good to see you. I am simultaneously casting on YouTube. It's time, says Midnight Rose. Good evening to you, Eric. If you guys want to have a real discussion with me, if you really want to talk to me, if you really want to have some questions answered, or at least hear a contrary opinion to what you may be hearing, you can come into my profile and you can go to the YouTube. I will talk to TikTok occasionally, but honestly, you guys have seen these TikTok chats, right? You've seen these TikTok chats. You know how ridiculous they get. The Ronnie stands show up. The Nazis show up. The straight up neoliberals are bad enough, right? Very unusual, right? But if you're going to take the journey all the way from TikTok and you're going to go from TikTok to YouTube, wait the time to get in my chat here on YouTube, then I'll have a talk with you. A real talk. And I'll give you my opinions. And I'll give you my thoughts, and I'll give you my perspective. And it might be something you haven't heard before, which I think that's the unique thing that I am offering. You think about what's the thing that we are offering out into the world? Well, I think it's a unique perspective. And that frustrates everybody. Who doesn't love a unique perspective that frustrates everybody? Snake, good to see you, bud. Looking to Z, good to see you. Look at Z playing some Dark Souls 3 PvP because I hate myself. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, dude. I can't imagine a more difficult, a more like you're trying to cause yourself pain. I think if you're doing Dark Souls 3 PvP, right? If you're doing Dark Souls 3 PvP, then you're literally in a place of like, I need to be victorious at this terrible thing that is just inflicting myself. Yep, Rose, the unique position of communists, managing to piss everyone off at once for speaking the truth. One of the things that's been going on around is this orcas destroying boats. Huh? Who's loving this story? I know I'm loving this story. Orcas destroying boats. You got all kinds of memes going on with this. I've got a great one up here. It's an orca in the communist symbol, right? Instead of the scythe, it's an orca. It says "Eat the rich." Who loves it? Who loves it? Oh man, everyone immediately wants my opinions on video games. Fantastic. Just hopped into Elden Ring myself, dude. Elden Ring's a good one. Like Elden Ring takes the Dark Souls formula and takes Legend of Zelda and basically mashes them together to give you an experience that is like, that elevates. It elevates above Dark Souls and meets Legend of Zelda, because Legend of Zelda is its own thing and is an exceptional franchise. So the Elden Ring, if you are going to get into anything from FromSoft, it's Elden Ring for sure, because the exploration, the discovery, the ability to express yourself within a game space, which I think is so important. I think it's probably the most important thing in gaming now, is the ability to express yourself, that it isn't just like a one thing and that's what you got to do. John says, what do we call 5 millionaires in a submarine missing on the bottom of the ocean? A good start. Yeah, let's keep it that way, right? Let's start shooting billionaires into space and leave them there. Let's start sending billionaires down to the bottom of the ocean and leave them there, right? I think that's a good start for all of us, right? Am I a big fan of the Fable franchise? I like Fable. Fable was, for its time, I think was good. Like, it never became exceptional, though, you know what I mean? That said, I, played them. I enjoyed them. They were never, to me, hitting that... They're a game that you would play if you didn't have access to some of the other really more exceptional stuff that's out there, right? Especially now, Fable didn't age well. But I do think if you don't have Fable, then you don't get a lot of other games. So Fable's like a stepping stone thing. It just doesn't age very well. I don't know anything about the Fable 4 trailer or the controversy surrounding it. I assume they'll release another one. And honestly, at this stage in the game, any of these old school... It's like Diablo 4, right? Any of these old school games that are getting redredged, it's the same thing that happened with movies, right? They're just taking familiar properties. Here's the capitalist lesson, right? We're here to talk about capitalism and our experience with it. All they're doing is taking things like, hey, remember that thing from your youth? And just jamming it in front of you and being like, hope that's enough to keep your attention or to get you to like it. And then the game itself is like, meh. Like Diablo 4. Diablo 4, near as I can tell, is just like, meh. And I more or less assume that Fable will be the same, right? Fable will just be like, meh. You know, that... I think it's a very special company and a very special group at this stage in the game that's actually saying we should produce a game that's a good game. And there are, like Nintendo with Legend of Zelda is obviously like, we can't just crap these out. Like we've actually got to make a good game that's really good and we really want to make... Oh my goodness, Eric, the whole controversy is conservatives. Good start, first of all. So it's a conservative controversy, so something totally manufactured and utterly nonsense. That wokeism, okay, great, first of all, like, they don't know what wokeism is. Like, and it seems to me like when conservatives say wokeism, they mean any idea that isn't just white men running the place, right? Any idea that isn't just like when they saw... Mad Men, they saw Don Draper as like the hero. They're looking at Mad Men and being like, that's what we need to look at and be part of, and that's Don Draper is the hero of this piece. That's what they think, right? That white men rule the world and anything outside of that is woke. So if you say like, maybe we should listen to women's opinions, woke. Maybe black people are people, woke, right? Maybe the Jews don't run the media, woke, right? And so if you try to step into reality at all and acknowledge a reality that goes beyond this sort of manufactured myth of white men rule the world, woke. And they ruined the lead character because she looks too manly and not pretty enough. And this is just them self-reporting, right? This is just them self-reporting that they think ugly women or women who are manly aren't also people. You know, that like, I can't understand. I don't want to be around an ugly woman. Like, fuck off. How about that? Like, they're literally saying out loud in front of everybody that the only reason I keep women around is to sexualize them and have them as a trophy. Right? That if they're not a sexual trophy, then why is this person in my life? That's the conservative position on women. That's it. And they're just, every time conservatives stand up and criticize something, it's essentially a self-report. Like, well, wait a minute. If we give black people the vote, then maybe they'll vote against us suppressing them so much. I think that's a problem. You know? Like, they're basically just admitting to you that they're Nazis every single time they open their mouth. And it's gotten to that point. Like, it's gotten to this point of heightened hysteria where obviously the conservative media is talking to Christian fascists at this point, that their base is essentially people who think magic is real, and Muslims and Jews and anybody non-Christian, non-white is a person that needs to be suppressed or created as a second-class citizen. And this is who the conservative media is talking to now, is a fascist Christian right that has organized itself and is steadily taking over the halls of power. And it is coming, right? It hasn't happened quite yet. It's not there quite yet, where the Christian fascists are just being open about it. Like, they still feel that they need to be, like, a little bit, like, oh, if we're going to exist in polite society, like these guys. But it is coming where these guys are going to stand up and be like, yeah, we're fascists. You take a look at guys like Matt Walsh, for example. Like, Matt Walsh, his Twitter bio says theocratic fascist on it, right? And nobody ever asks him about it. Guy goes on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan isn't like, hey, what's with the theocratic fascist thing, right? But it's coming. Like, it's absolutely coming. Yeah. Of course, intelligent creatures like killer whales would do it. Yeah. Honestly, dude, like, I bet you the killer whales are just like, what's with these things? F these things. Like, at first they were probably like, huh, one of them. And now they're like, huh, a bunch of them. And they're like, nah, F this. Like, what forget this. Sorry to bring up games again. You know what? It's okay to talk about games, because games are part of our culture. It's part of who we are. It's another art form. It's something worth explaining, worth describing. Yeah, anything left of Hitler, woke. Exactly. Sorry, guys, I gotta rescue my dog. 1 second. Oh, Milo. Little snorty fit. I know. Come on, buddy. Little snorty fit. If you're going to have a little snorty fit while I'm streaming, buddy, then you get to be part of the stream. You hear this thing he's doing? Right there? He gets caught in this, like, feedback loop of snorts, and you got to go in and got to massage his neck. And if you don't massage his neck, then he gets caught in that feedback loop. And I've gotten pretty good at it, so he's... Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. That's a big one, buddy. That's a big one. We're going to get right in there, my man. Oh. Okay, hold on. Okay, my man. We got to go real deep into the muscle tissue, right? You're such a good boy. Oh, that's a good boy. Did we do it? You want a treat? Okay, over you go. Ooh. Here's a treat for you, buddy. Oh, no, that's not good. Now it's real bad. Okay. Oh, it stopped. So let's give you a treat. Let's give you a proper treat. Let's give you a nice, real treat, buddy. Here you go, my man. You're such a good boy. I'm sorry that your face is like that. I'm sorry that capitalism ruined your face. There you go. The pug is a really great example of how capitalism ruins everything for everyone all of the time, including wildlife, including nature itself. That the pug went through a period of puppy milling, right? Pre-recorded stream, everyone move along. David Dobbs, how you doing, bud? Pre-recorded stream, everyone move along. Yeah, pre-recorded stream, says Dave Dobbs. Everyone move along. Hey, everybody, says Dave Dobbs. Pre-recorded stream. I guess Dave Dobbs is in to the pre-recorded stream. Ha, smart guy. Pre-recorded stream. Where did I study economics? I studied economics by reading all of the books. And there's courses online that you can take. Berkeley, Harvard, Oxford, they're all online. Bro proves the haters wrong. That's right, because I'm a communist. And that's basically what we do, right? This Ronnie stuff is blowing me away. I gotta believe that these Ronnie guys are bots at this point. Like, the Ronnie stuff is unbelievable to me. It's got more staying power than Harambe. It's crazy. Andor has opened the chat. Communists always flee to China. I mean, big news, actually. Big news about China. Seeing as you're bringing up China, let's talk about it, right? This is actual news. I've been doing this for a little while now, and it seems like it's mainly just commentary on the decline of Western civilization. But this U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the Biden administration does not support Taiwan independence. That is actually huge. It is actually massive and enormous that the United States Secretary of State has said publicly out loud in front of everybody that the Biden administration is not in support of Taiwanese independence. So this whole narrative that people have been talking about for months now in my chat and has been saying to me forever that Taiwan's independent and they got the right to their own and China should butt it and it's all over now. It's all over. Taiwan has been part of China, and China and Taiwan have been moving to integrate one another, and it's been internationally recognized since the 60s, since Nixon. And it's only been extremely recently that this whole Taiwan independent kind of nonsense has been getting kicked back up in the propaganda system. And now it's over. It's totally dead. The only way it comes back, because all this means is that the corporate, the corporate neoliberal side of the capitalist death cult is saying we can't do war with China, we got to drop this Taiwan thing. So there's still the Christian fascists, which is the Republican Party, right? Which is the fascist wing of the capitalist death cult. That the capitalist death cult, at least part of it, has finally conceded that we simply cannot engage in war with China over Taiwan. We simply can't do it. But there's still a whole other, there's the fundamentalists, the absolutely kooky, crazy Christians, who can still come out and be like, no, war with China. The problem with what's going on in the world today is China. We need to go after China, right? Orange Man can show up and everything can come back to it. Yeah, Ronnie guys are feds trying to get John to kill himself. It's pretty obvious. Like they did with Martin Luther King, right? Like, it's pretty straightforward. Like, it's one of the... And the reason they do it is because it works, right? The reason they do it is because it works. Like, all it takes is for somebody is for someone like me, right, to get into a depressive state, which does happen, and then this whole like other side of it comes on, and then there's this maybe I should kill myself. Life is so pointless, all this kind of stuff. But the problem is that I'm just existentially rooted. Like, that's the problem with these feds, right? That's the problem, is that if you're existentially rooted, if you understand where you exist and what life is and all of that, then you're not immune to it, obviously, but like, you're not just gonna kill yourself because you have like a sad day, you know? You're not gonna kill yourself just because some fucking feds are trying to tell you so. And to the feds, the Ronnie guys, keep wasting your resources, dude. Like, I can't believe people do this. I can't believe people join the FBI and join the CIA and still think they're good guys somehow. Like, and I think many of them don't. I think that they literally are just like, I make a bunch of money and I get to rape little girls, so it works. Miami is to Cuba as Taiwan is to China. It's not a bad idea to let the reactionary right find a place to go exist in their hate. I mean, we cannot fight China. Like, we can't. If we fight China, that's a global catastrophe. Like, a global catastrophe. China makes everything. Like, China makes everything. Taiwan makes a lot, like, most of the world's chips. Most of the world's chips are coming out of Taiwan. And so if there's a war over it, well, like, imagine the damage that's going to do to computer markets. Like, it's crazy. And I mean, the Christian right will probably do it, because the Christian right doesn't make its decisions based on what's good for reality, right? The Christian right makes its decisions based on a magic book that they all pretend to read and don't. Eric says, as an economic major, I agree with you, since it's all theory with no real application. The only look, my thinking about I've read Adam Smith. I've read a lot of Marx, of course, and of course there's always more to read, and you take courses, Berkeley, Harvard, Oxford, they all have courses online. You can go take this stuff, and you realize pretty fast that, like, what these guys are teaching and what they're preaching, this neoliberal economics that they're preaching, is a religious ideology. A big reason why America is going down the shitter is because at the highest possible levels of their economic strata is essentially a religious cult. And the religious cult is basically built around the principle that if we extract all the wealth away from everyone and put it in the hands of a small group of people, that this will somehow benefit the society. There's no evidence for it, but it's what they do. And so it's a religious cult. And this religious cult, the real trouble that America is facing is that the next generation is being indoctrinated into this cult. That there's no one at the highest strata going, maybe we should actually think about economics. And the number one way that you can tell that the economics departments at places like Harvard, Oxford, Berkeley are religious institutions is because the capitalist death cult created a secondary education system called business schools, right? If economics was actually economics, well, that's where business people would go and they would learn economics, but it's not. It's teaching you a religion. And the capitalists understand that, okay, well, we need people to actually run businesses. Like, we need people who actually understand how economy works to a degree, right? We don't want a society of people who know how economics works, because then they'll understand that we're teaching them a religious, like a religious fundamentalist cult, right? But we do need people who understand how to run a business, because we want them to run our businesses for us, because we're worthless parasites who own everything, do no business whatsoever, like do nothing of value whatsoever, and just extract as much wealth as we possibly can before abandoning everybody, right? That's the system that we operate in. And so we still need people who know how to run like a Starbucks. We still need people who know how to run like a Walmart, right? We still need these people. And so we teach them business school. Get everybody to go through business school, which is a huge scam, right? You take 4 years to teach them something that they could learn in 3 months, to extract as much value as you can out of the people that you are parasiticizing in the first place, turning them into debt peonage slaves, right? Turning them into debt peonage serfs. And then you get them into your businesses to run your businesses, but they have no sense of what the meta of their economic activity actually is. So they can run a Walmart, but they don't understand what Walmart exists in the world around them, because they're not taught that. And the very system that exists in order to teach that meta sort of sense, which would be the economics department of a Harvard, is a religious institution that's teaching you something that has nothing to do with reality. And so you end up with a system of people who are just like ruthlessly destroying one another inside of systems, and don't have any idea how those systems operate in a meta sense in the world around you. And it's causing the generalized collapse of the society, because everything is just run underneath one of these umbrellas, and then the umbrellas are constantly merging and destroying one another. And there's no sense of like, let's maybe actually build a community, let's actually build a nation, let's actually build projects, let's actually build something that's actually gonna be good and make something worthwhile for the future, right? That everything is literally just thought of in 4-month increments, more or less. That if any planning does occur, it's just one person planning for themselves, more or less. That like Warren Buffett makes a plan for himself, and he doesn't give a crap about the rest of the world. He doesn't give a crap about what's going on, unless somebody can say to him like, hey, you can make money like here. Then he'll be like, okay, cool, I'll take some of my billions of dollars that I extracted out of the working class and put it here so I can get a 2% return over 10 years. Like, the system, like, the reason why this system is in the generalized sense of collapse is because no one at the highest level, and no one in the next generation at the highest level, actually even attempts to understand the system of capital or even the system of Western imperialism in any kind of meta sense. So we lack self-awareness. We're completely lacking in self-awareness. We don't, and moreover, we don't know anything at all about other nations. We don't know anything about Russia. We don't know anything about China. We don't know anything about India. We don't know anything about Africa. We don't know anything about South America. And yet we feel we have the right to run the world as our entire system begins to fall into a generalized collapse. And it's staggering. It's absolutely staggering to watch the arrogance of Western powers as they proclaim their grandness as their society essentially decays and collapses. It's blistering. It's wild. It's absolutely wild to watch. Yeah, thank God for Michael Hudson. Hudson, absolutely good name to drop. Michael Hudson. Richard Wolff, another really great name. Somebody in the chat the other day was asking me for a source on my claim that communism actually does give benefits to the society and so. And I was just blanking hard because I was in like a general kind of depressive fugue. But Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. Like, Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. Michael Parenti just basically goes through the historical ledger and basically just says, yeah, like, before the communists showed up, this is the system that existed, like a feudal poverty, right, or an imperial slave system. Communists showed up, and the standard of living goes up, literacy rates go up, all of these things go up, and he just shows you very clearly that that's the case. Wait, John, so you don't believe that the children of the wealthy aren't inherently born superior to the lower class families? Society can't function without them. Yeah, you know what, John? Checkmate. You got me, bud. Yeah, that without the divine right of kings, without the ruler, without Bill Gates' children have the right to rule us. That they earned being billionaires by the invisible hand of the market, coming and bestowing upon them the absolute goodness of all of the life that exists. Right? Like, and more or less this is how libertarians think. This is more or less how the fascist right thinks. That like these people are good because they're rich, right? Like that if you're like an Elon Musk stan, if you're sitting there being like, Elon Musk, baby, yeah, I love you, it is more or less because you believe in the divine right of kings. That's essentially it. That Elon Musk was born in a billionaire into a family that owned emerald mines in apartheid South Africa, that they literally benefited from slavery. Like literally, like slaves with pickaxes nailing out emeralds in a mine. That's how they got wealthy. And Elon Musk is now like, we're definitely getting to Mars for sure, that's happening. And everybody's just like, oh yeah, Mars, that's for sure happening. It's just like a secular collapse into a religious ideology. Like if you actually think that Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars, then you might as well just say that you believe Jesus is real and that he's coming back at any time, right? It's not much different. It's not much different. The funny part, says Eric, the funny part is so-called theories that they use in the free market actually prove what Marx argues. I actually want to do a doctorate proving Marx using neoliberal theories. Like, what are the neoliberal theories? The neoliberal theory basically boils down to just let rich people do what they want and everything will work out. Like, that's essentially their theory. That, like, sure, you could, like, make it a lot more complex than that if you want, which is exactly what they do. They make it complex on purpose, so that they can stand in front of you and be like, oh, well, you just don't understand the theory. You need a PhD, and I made it. It's like, no, like what you're doing is very simple. What they're doing is very simple, right? Extract wealth upwards and abandon everybody around you. That's neoliberal theory in a nutshell. Like, and you don't need to get like much more complex than that. They want it to be more complex because the more complex they can make it sound and the more difficult they can make it and the more they can obfuscate what it is that they're doing, the more effective that it'll be. Because you're spending all of your time trying to suss through what it's how Peterson works, right? It's the same thing, right? Just take something that's a sentence and then just expand it into like a 3-page or 30-page or 80-page dissertation if you can, right? But when you actually get through it and you suss through it, you're like, oh, this is literally just like a 3-word sentence, right? And it's what they do. It's what they do. The obfuscation through making things complex on purpose, right? Make it complex on purpose. And you can say things like, well, I'm an expert because I say it takes me 3 hours to say a sentence. Most of the pro-communist members in Russia became hardcore capitalist after. It's less about economics for me and more about those who want to rule and subjugate others. I'm beginning to see more and more, Yetis, that there's something that happened post-World War II that I'm beginning to call the period of appeasement. That I think post-World War II, all of the communist nations, more or less, the communist superpowers anyway, more or less began to realize that they are going to need to play ball with the system of capital to some degree or another. That they're not going to be able to fight wars against capitalism because capitalism is willing to fight wars. Like, it's completely willing to fight massive wars of aggression over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? And so I just think that, like, what you have with, like, Gorbachev and Yeltsin and all these guys is a period of appeasement. And then also I think you have that with Deng as well, is that Deng was essentially appeasing the capitalists. And that with Russia, that appeasement turned into a collapse of the society generally, that the structure of the ruling class became so intertwined with the system of capital that it ceased being anything even resembling a system of communism. That's not exactly what happened in China, though. That China's a different story. That the appeasement has actually kind of backfired on the system of capital, more or less. That the appeasement, like, the whole riff from communists is seize the means of production, right? Seize the means of production. Well, the Chinese didn't seize the means of production. They traded for it. That the Western world was more than willing to trade away the means of production for pieces of paper that they could print on a screen or like digital currencies and all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the Chinese are sitting there being like, oh yeah, so we had like a period of capital. Like, what's going to happen in China, and what I see happening in China is that they had this Dangus period of capitalist sort of intersection into their economy, and now that's dying off. And it looks to me like China is moving forward. They're spreading around their wealth more and more. That the means of production are steadily becoming more and more owned by the workers themselves. A key example of that is Huawei. Huawei, which is like the workers themselves are the shareholders. They get the payout, right? So but it seems to me like post World War II, when America is going around like bombing Vietnam, bombing Laos, bombing Cambodia, the Korean War had just dropped nukes on civilian populations, making it very clear their willingness to absolutely destroy people around the globe. I think the communist superpowers basically had to say, okay, we got to negotiate with these guys. Like, we got to negotiate. Like, we can't go to war with these guys. They will destroy us all. Even if it destroys themselves. Even if the system of capital has to destroy itself to destroy communist nations, it'll totally do that. And so you got to kind of negotiate with this, right? You got to negotiate with this. Well, somebody's donating $5. Here's some anarchist money. You offer good thoughts, and I appreciate your passion and concern for oppressed people. Come on, commies, show me up. Oh, well, a challenge from Grinning Guys. $5 donation. Thank you, Grinning. I appreciate that, bud. I really do. And a big shout out to my Patreons. Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much for your support, guys. Thank you so much for sticking it out with me. I know that I've gone through like a pretty bad period here, but I think I'm on the up and up. So, Eric writes, I was visiting my boomer dad in Florida. The topic of Elon Musk and Bill Gates comes up, and he thought I was completely insane to critique them, to say it wasn't through hard work but being born into wealth yet. For him, that was the most ludicrous idea ever. And on top of that, he's a hardcore libertarian, which is no surprise. Yeah, you can be a libertarian as long as you don't acknowledge reality, right? Oh man, he listens to people like Charlie Kirk. If you're listening to Charlie Kirk, dude, you're in the weeds. Like, you're in the weeds. Cotton writes, I have $2 to my name. Of course you do, Cotton. Holy shit. Every time you come in here, bud, you tell me a story of something crazy that's going on. I worry for you, my man. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a good weekend, my man. Like, geez Louise. Don't you worry about a thing, Cotton. Don't you worry about a thing. Like, whole bud. Yeah, we got a Ronnie Stan. Another bot, another Fed. Yeah, that's right. Either become a capitalist or be invaded by them. I would argue that the Chinese did not become capitalist. That the National People's Congress did not get corrupted by the system of capital, and that at the end of the day, what seems to have happened is that the Chinese are just more clever than. First of all, I got to address something really quick here. Nunya, again, I've said this to you before, dude. 66 million people died at the hands of communism in Russia alone between this period and this period. Yeah, like Nazis, right? Or Tsarists, right? Also, source required, dude. Like, I'd like to see your source. Like, you could send me a book to read. You can send me anything, right? You hate capitalism, yet you enjoy the fruits of it, like that Starbucks. No, once again, Chrissy, you're confused. Right, I get this a lot. Right, so here's a good example: Starbucks cup. Right, capitalists did not create this; workers did. Right, workers created this. That what I am advocating for is not the elimination of this; it is that the benefits of the creation of such a thing actually goes into the hands of the workers, and not the hands of the capitalists. that capitalism is a system that extracts. It extracts surplus value, creating a parasitic class of people who do no work, provide no value whatsoever, and sit atop the society in a strata, right? That's never going to happen except for all the times it did. So, and I mean, I love this. This is like basically intellectual constipation. Just admitting it's not going to happen. Okay, cool. Then move along, Chrissy. Like, you have conceded your intellectual credibility, basically. It's just not going to happen. Okay, bye. The rest of us are going to try to move forward, okay? Of course, he thought that neoliberalism was just ad hominem by the left. So he just doesn't know anything. Like literally, yeah, Milton Friedman. Like, the whole Milton Friedman period is just like straight up like neoliberalism. Like, that's what it is. Compton had a scary, mysterious illness over the weekend. Of course you did, Compton. Of course you did, dude. One of these days, my man, you're going to come in here with good news, and I'm going to be like, Compton's been replaced. Compton's been replaced. Compton's a Fed now. Grinning says, my traffic fines were reduced by 75%, so I feel kind of flush, not going to lie. Good news. Good news. Hey, every little bit counts these days. Milo's getting involved. Milo's getting involved. Milo, dude, there's nothing here for you. There's no treats or anything. Jeez. It's going to result in totalitarianism like it always does. I would argue that you don't actually know anything about the subject. I would argue that if you're saying things like that, then you don't actually know anything about the subject. That you have essentially listened to what the CIA has to say, and you're not considering things like the Soviet Union. It's like, yeah, the Soviet Union had a tight, controlled society because they were being invaded by Nazis. Like, yeah, you're going to have a more militant society while being invaded by Nazis. But that never comes into the discourse, right? And the Western world doesn't want to discuss that, because the Western world understands that if you actually start talking about Nazis, then you start to realize things like, hey, wait a minute, why is Germany in NATO? Why is Germany part of the international banking system? Why is it that post-World War II, all of the Nazis moved over into systems like NASA through Operation Paperclip? Why is it that the Henry Ford was essentially the guy who was selling the Nazis the engines they needed in order to perpetuate the war machine, and we never discuss it, right? Why is it that we've allied ourselves so tightly with a society that regurgitated up a figure like Adolf Hitler? And it's because the system of capital is rewarding the society for doing its job, right? Which is, once the system of capital is threatened, it's supposed to regurgitate figures like Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler did exactly what the Western capitalists wanted him to do, right? Protect the system of capital. Random question, John. I love random questions. How do you deal with slander by people in real life and on the internet when they lie on your name? When they lie on your name. Like, I don't think I understand that. But how do you deal with slander by people in real life? Well, slander by people on the internet is easy, right? Everybody you talk to is probably 6. Like as soon as you kind of put into your head that you're probably talking to a kid, then everything's probably fine, right? Like, you don't actually know who these people are. There's no reason to get all hyped up when a 10-year-old says something, right? So internet people are 10 usually. And that makes it a lot easier to talk to everybody because, you know, you're not going to be that crappy to a 10-year-old, right? No matter what they say. But people in real life, one of my mantras with dealing with people in real life who are kind of shitty is just to remember that the hardest thing for people to do is to deal with themselves, and the punishment, like everybody is just a visitor in your life. They're just vacationing in your life when you're interacting with them. And if you're having a bad time with them, chances are good they're having a bad time with themselves. And so the great punishment for most people is that they have to deal with themselves. And they've just got to continue living this crappy life, being a miserable sad sack to everybody around them, right? And so you just try your best, right? You just de-escalate There's no reason to get your own emotional state into a heightened position, because what you're experiencing is temporary. That this person is having a miserable time, and there's no reason adopting their position of misery. It just doesn't make any sense. But I mean, easier said than done, right? So you got to kind of grapple with your own emotional self. Something that we don't do ever at all. Gritting says, and that University of Baltimore study. Oh, hold on. What are you saying here, Red? Oh. Oh, yeah. You guys are commenting on, like, source, Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Yeah. University of Baltimore study. 0 primary sources, pure propaganda. Yeah. Midnight Rose says, I find it weird that people complain about how China is capitalist when there was just a slew of articles about China's billionaire class disappearing and being purged. Yeah, there was an article that came out recently, and I reported on it on this channel. I think I might be able to find it in the memes. That, like, literally Xi Jinping is saying out loud that he's trying to get rid of the billionaire class. That they're literally doing the thing that Deng told them to do. You guys are looking at the meme section on my Discord. If you donate $1, you can get into it as well. It's a good time. Lots of good people. Everybody's great. I feel like there's some people I haven't invited, and I probably should. I can't find it. That's okay. If somebody does find what I'm talking about, let me know. Because, like, the National People's Congress has always discussed, like, Deng always discussed, and these guys always discussed about how, like, they understood that allowing the capitalist system to interact with the Chinese economy was going to have negative side effects, right? They understood what those negative side effects were. And now Xi Jinping, and likely his predecessor, is doing everything they can to even those negative side effects out. And now China has gotten itself into a place where, like, they've integrated themselves so tightly into the global economy that it's like America's usual solution of just bombing countries into submission. It doesn't really work with China anymore. That even if they could, right? Even if they could bomb China into submission, well, it means that the American economy collapses too. Like, that's what's so crazy. Like, China's done such a good job of integrating itself internationally that if America were to go to war with China, the first thing that would happen is the American economy would collapse, like pretty swiftly even. Yeah, like anti-corruption campaign, and that's literally what Xi Jinping was elected to do, and he's doing it. And I just think that when Western Marxists, especially when Western Marxists get themselves into a position where they're critiquing China especially, it's because we have this kind of lack of planning. We don't believe that a government or that a nation can actually plan something and then enact that plan over time. We're so used to this idea that the government itself is at war with itself, and that clearly what's happening in our government must be how every government works and how everything works all of the time. That there can never be a moment of tension and then a denouement and then an execution of a plan over a long period of time. That can never happen. Well, that's exactly what China does. It's exactly how it operates, and it's why it's getting ahead of us in big ways, because it doesn't destroy what its predecessor built. That the conflicts that happen politically in China happen over kind of a longer scale of time, right? Like the transition from Mao to Deng is a really good example of this, where I think the key disagreement is the Cultural Revolution, that Mao wanted to continue sort of the militancy, the Great Leap Forward, and was hoping that he was going to be able to convince the society to continue the sort of procedure of leaping forward in big giant strides. And the society couldn't. Like, it just eventually got to the point where it was like, this is exhausting. We're tired. Like, we're tired. Like, this isn't like good, nice thought, Mao, but like, we're tired. And what this guy Deng is saying is more in line with what we're looking for. And so they went that way. And it's working, because it's not people have this really, like, Western Marxists especially, have this really weird idea in their head that Deng came in as a traitor, that Deng betrayed everybody, and he's a traitor to China, and oh my god, capitalism runs the place now, and it's a weird idea, because the approval rating amongst the Chinese people of the government is in the 90s. Harvard did a study. I've got a link for it. I can show it to you. Harvard did a study on China and Chinese approval ratings through of their government. And not only was it high to begin with, it was a 20-year study. It was like 17 years. And not only was it high to begin with, it improved over time. And so if it is the fact that Deng came in and betrayed communism and oh my god, it's a disaster, and capitalism runs the place and oh my goodness, well then the people of China love it. And so it's a really weird position for a Western Marxist to take, that the people of China love capitalism. Like, perhaps what's actually going on is that the people of China understand the system that they live in. They understand the negotiation, the ongoing conversation that's happening in their society, probably more than we do, and that they understand that there's a plan that's being enacted, and moreover, they see the benefits of that plan. Like, it's really, really difficult to convince me that, like, if I was living in a society, if I was living where I was, and literally that hill, there's like a hill sitting right there, and that hill is like full of just huts, and it's just generalized poverty, right? And in the space of 20 years, it becomes a city, just like a city, just goes poof. And everybody now is living in apartments and houses, right? And there are jobs and there's productivity and all this kind of stuff. Entire industries, literally we're going from like steel manufacturing to like being the #1 chip manufacturer in the world, just like poof, poof, poof. These things just exploding upwards all around me all the time. I wouldn't be standing around being like, oh, what a terrible, like, I'd be like, holy shit, like, we're doing stuff here, man. Like, we're doing stuff. We're partying. We're rock and rolling, man. Like, we're not getting, and so for Western Marxists to sort of concede that Chinese people love the system they're under because it's capitalist is weird, especially as the ruling class, which is the National People's Congress, which is the Chinese Communist Party, every time they talk about it, they go, yeah, this is socialism. We are moving towards communism. This is all part of our larger plan under this socialism with Chinese characteristics. And then we're all just like, no, it's not good enough. As if what our opinion matters. As if our opinion matters. Like, we have gotten into a position now with the Chinese where, like, we need to be learning from these guys. We need to be looking at their history, reading what they're writing as students, not as teachers. It's very odd. It's a very odd sort of way to think that you, as a white Westerner who has read Karl Marx, knows more about it than the people who are actually enacting the revolution. Like, that's the weirdest possible position, I think. Yeah, why is it that the Bush family profited through business deals with the Nazis? Yeah. Look, the Nazis were well integrated into the system of capital, and they were doing what the system of capital wanted, which was expunging leftist elements. Like, why do you think they went to war with the communists? Like, the first concentration camps were communists. Like, Adolf Hitler existed in order to expunge anybody walking around talking about, hey, maybe the rich and powerful shouldn't own everything, right? I hate it when it jumps down like that. Lie on your name means telling untruths about you and over-exaggerating things. What, like, to your face? Like, I don't know, dude. Like, if people are just gonna, like, lie about you, like, what... all you can do is be like, okay, like, you're just talking shit. But if they're lying about you to other people, like you can't stop a liar from being a liar. You can just point at them and say he's lying. And that's the best that you can do. The trouble, of course, is that Westerners are gullible. Like that's the biggest problem, right? Like that Mark Twain kind of nailed it. He said it's easier to trick someone than to convince somebody they've been tricked, and because Westerners are so overwhelmingly gullible and so willing to just be spoon-fed any lie that they're told, then they just believe what they're told by some passing grifter, and because there is no credible systems left in the society. And there's no real system that exists in order to vet anything credibly any longer, which is why, only 40% of Canadians trust legacy media, which I consider to be quite high. But so that, like this, think about this: 40% of Canadians still trust legacy media. That means 40% of Canadians are the most gullible people you've ever met in your life. They'll believe anything they're told by anyone. That you can say anything to anyone and these people will just believe it. 40% of the society are just extreme gullible rubes. And are probably operating based on just base tribalism, right? That my team says this, therefore it good. And there's, all you can do is just be honest, be consistent, point it out, right? That's all you can do. Because people are always going to lie about you. Like if I'm more or less of the opinion, like if you're not making enemies or you're really living, right? There's lots of good examples of people who you should be an enemy of, right? Like you should be an enemy of somebody like Matt Walsh. Like you should be trying to make enemies like that. So people who are reprehensible fascists, right? Grinning guys. I rarely open myself to slander offline. I make sure that people know me and like me before I have transparent political conversations with them. It's a long process for me to say I'm an anarchist. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting, Grinning, and I'm more or less of the opinion that here's the one conspiracy theory. For all you TikTokers out there, here's the one conspiracy theory that I'm absolutely willing to throw all my chips in. Like, I'm looking for the day where I actually get a piece of hard evidence. So I'll be like, told you. I absolutely believe that we are being actively hypnotized by this technology. Like, we know that you can be hypnotized through screens. We've seen that process. You can look that up on YouTube. People can be hypnotized with screens. We absolutely know that people can have trigger words implanted or incepted into their consciousness. We absolutely know that can happen. And the CIA, we have hard evidence and confessions and documents showing that the CIA back in the 70s and 80s was experimenting with mind control technology. So it is not it's not a leap to believe that the CIA is attempting to hypnotize people through phones in order to put into their consciousness trigger words that activate their fight or flight response. That makes it so that they cannot be rational. I've seen it in real life. Like, I have talked to people about all of the things that communism is about. I've talked to people about all the things that communism is about. And they've just been like, that's absolutely right, you know, you're absolutely right. Say the word communist, their face goes red, their eyes get wide, they lose the ability to be reasonable or rational, and it's immediately 100 million people dead, iPhone influence, and they lose their mind. They lose their capacity for reason. And I think that if we do another church commission, which was when the Congress back in the 70s did an audit of the CIA and discovered things like Operation Mockingbird, Operation Paperclip, MK Ultra. If we did another one of those, we would find out that what the CIA has been doing is they've been hypnotizing people through phones and have been incepting people. There's a really, really good poll that I saw that added some veracity to this, which is, if you ask the average American, do you think we should be helping the poor? Do you think that we should be providing services to the poor? People are like, absolutely, yes, absolutely, we should absolutely be doing that. If you say, do you think we should be providing welfare? Everybody's like, no, that's terrible, welfare's awful. And so here's a clear example of a trigger word. That if you ask them, do you think that we should do the thing that welfare means? People are like, absolutely we should, absolutely, of course. But if you actually say the word welfare, they lose the capacity for reason. They lose touch with what it actually means. And they're strictly against it. And I think the same thing is happening with words like anarchism, words like communism. They lost socialism. There's been a generalized break on the word socialism. That the Bernie Sanders campaign proved to everybody that you can say the word socialist and talk about socialism, and it's been broken. So whatever hold they had or whatever thing they had on that particular trigger word no longer functions. It doesn't work. Well, it works. It has less veracity, let's say. So thus ends the one conspiracy theory that I'm absolutely willing to go in on. I have no hard evidence for everything that I said, but it makes complete and total sense. And one day we'll run another church commission on the CIA, and I'll hold the document in front of you all and be like, what have I been saying? What have I been saying? That's exactly. It's going to be called like Operation Pick Pop. No, Operation Soaring Thunder. I don't know, Operation something or other. Grinning says, in February, Bao Fan, a renowned investment banker, became the latest name on the list of vanishing billionaires. Yeah, vanish those billionaires. I don't give a crap at all. I love it when people say to me, like, China's bad because of the vanishing billionaire. I'm great. Fantastic. Bye-bye. Eric, just yesterday I read a comment from an anarchist where he argued that China is corporatism, like the U.S., because base of the Gini index and the guy since China and U.S. Guinea are similar, therefore blah, blah, blah. No, that's just a misunderstanding of what communism is about. It's about who owns the means of production. And, like, there are very clear examples. Like, did you guys know that in the Chinese, like, one of the critiques that people will say to me is that there's no unions. There's no unions in China. They don't allow unions. It's like built in to their constitution is that every business, including the capitalist businesses, must have a workers' council. So if it's a state-owned enterprise or if it's a capitalist-owned enterprise, there must be a workers' council. And that the workers' council has a certain degree of power within the structures. And so they've embedded within the fabric of their constitution the idea that workers have a say. And this idea that China is the same as America, it's laughable. It's laughable. You can shrug that off so easily. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement. And to say that it's because China is also wealthy, it's like, what are you talking about? Midnight Rose, Western Marxists need to stop being so Eurocentric and consider that their Chinese comrades understand China better than them. That's fundamentally it. That the people of China, that Chinese Marxists probably understand Marxism better than we do. Or at least they understand Marxism within the context of their own country better than we do. And while they're, and again, I think the thing that's worth addressing in this conversation is the obvious struggle and the obvious fight that occurred between Mao and Deng. That the Maoists were very deeply concerned about the corrupting influence of capitalism and were deeply, deeply concerned that the capitalist system was going to overwhelm China. Doesn't look like that's happened. Right? Doesn't look like that's happened. So what I like to say is I think the Maoists were right to be concerned. Like I that's the thing that I think people don't really ever do. Right? When you get to this conversation, Mao versus Deng, right? There's sort of this general idea that like, oh well, you think that Mao was full of shit, or else I don't think Mao was full of shit at all. I think Mao and the people around Mao had every reason to be concerned. I think that the fight that they put up was reasonable. I think it was completely reasonable for a people, especially a group of people who literally organized a military in order to fight a war against imperial powers, to then become extremely concerned when the next generation of Marxists started saying we should negotiate with these guys. I think that's completely reasonable to stand there and say, that's concerning. We sacrificed a lot to get here. We sacrificed a lot. We fought wars. We lost comrades. We saw our friends and families get killed. We did the Great Leap Forward. We sacrificed a lot to get here. And now you're telling me you want to negotiate with the very forces we were fighting against in the first place? You're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. I think it's completely reasonable. I think it's a completely reasonable position. But on the other side of it, I think that the Dengist position is not only a reasonable position, I think it's borne out. I think that the Dengists and the people who supported Deng, and which is the majority of the Chinese people, I think they understood that we can do this. We can do this. That Mao built us a strong foundation, and we're a strong people. We have strong institutions. We have faith in what we're doing. We have faith in the project, and we can do this and be successful. We don't think that what's happening is traitorous or that we're being betrayed. We can come together. We can continue this process by going down a different path. And I think that what they were saying was also very reasonable, and it's borne out. And it's borne out. Like, proof's in the pudding. Say what you want, right? Say what you want. And there are things to criticize about Chinese society, just like there's things to criticize about any society, right? But to say that the trajectory of Chinese society is not moving in the direction of a socialist, is not moving in a socialist direction, I think that you're just being purposefully illiterate. You're just purposefully not looking at what's going on in China. That, of course, there's things to improve. You know who understands that better than us? The Chinese themselves. Of course. But anytime you take a look at these societies, you realize you got to take a look at where they were, and then you got to take a look at where they are, and then you got to take a look at where they want to go. That's how you actually critique societies, right? You don't take a look at where they are and say, this is where they are, that's the whole story. Well, because where they are might actually be a shocking improvement from where they were. And you got to listen to what they're saying, where they want to go, and what their plans are, and where they're going to go, right? So I'll give a real clear example. Like some guy's working in a gas station, right? And he's 60. There's a 60-year-old man, he's pumping gas at a gas station. That's his job, right? And you look at that and you think to yourself, what a loser. What a loser, right? But if you sit and you listen to the guy's story, or if you look at the guy's story, you find out that his whole life was destroyed. Everything burnt down around him through no fault of his own. It was just crazy what happened. He spent 10 years in the streets. He got addicted to fentanyl. He was going through ridiculous, and he even spent some time in jail, right? And then he got out of that. He cleaned up his life. He got all of that behind him. He got stable. He got an apartment. And now he's got a stable, strong job working at a gas station. And not only that, he's also planning to go back to school because he wants to continue contributing to the society that helped him get out of fentanyl. So which one of these two stories? Like, do you think that guy's such a bad guy now? Like, no. And I think anybody that thinks that is probably just a Nazi, probably just a loser fascist, right? That shit happens to people. Bad things happen to people. And if you know the whole story of their existence and the trajectory of where they want to go and the trajectory of their life, then you can understand that. But if all you're going to do is take a look at this flash in the pan, one snapshot, without understanding the generalized context of what's going on, then you can basically make whatever claim you like about anything you like. You can basically say anything you like about anyone, anywhere, at any moment, if you're going to do that kind of thing. Oh, yeah. Grinning. Smug anarchist here. Yes, typically anarchists will say that MLM, Maoism, reproduces capitalism. I don't know about... anyway, I don't really care to get into that whole conversation. Adam 8. I don't know if I've ever seen you here, Adam. First comment for you. Let's hope it's a beautiful one. I like to spend a little bit more time with new people because I am trying to build something here. I'm all for unionizing and free healthcare, but why do socialists get so heated about USSR, China, and North Korea? So what a big question, right? What a big question. And I think I was kind of talking about it just there, Adam. That socialists, I think, Western socialists, you got to remember that Western socialism was more or less destroyed during the McCarthy period. right? The McCarthy period and the blacklisting of communists and socialists generally was effective. That the CIA exists in order, the raison d'etre for its very existence is to destroy communism, right? That's the biggest reason why the CIA exists. And so they are, and they're very effective. And not only did they blacklist a bunch of people, not only did they purge a bunch of ranks, not only did they do a whole bunch of expelling of people from the society, have you or are you a member of the Communist Party, any of this kind of language that still exists in much of the documentation. If you want to immigrate to America, for example, you have to answer that question. Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party exists on the immigration documentation. You have to answer that question. And so there's a lot of so Western Marxists are used to being betrayed. They're used to being scared. They're used to seeing a dagger come out and plunge into their back. And so everybody gets really kind of heated. And so if you can't have real conversations about socialism and communism in your own country, then you start to act like a backseat quarterback about communism in other countries. And because I think that you're taking the existential desire to see it happen in your own country and projecting it onto other countries. I think that that's what happens. And the reason why I talk about China so much is because I'm trying to convince Western Marxists that there's something to learn there. That we can learn something from China. We can learn something from what they're doing. We can see the value in the way that they think and the way that they operate in the world. And that we can actually move forward on these principles and see success. And that people who are walking around pretending like communism or socialism doesn't work are clueless. There's a clear, shining beacon, an obvious example that's right in front of your face. And people don't want to admit it. People don't want to admit it. And when Western Marxists don't do it, I get to thinking that it is because there is this like Western chauvinist idea that they're not white, therefore they're inferior. That's part of the ethos that's kind of built into our skin. And then there's also the element of just straight up like a kind of fundamentalist purity. Like, I read the works of Marx, therefore I understand how communism should be enacted. But the truth is that when theory and reality meet, the thing that usually needs to bend is the theory, not reality. And that's more or less what I see happening in China, that the theory needs to, that the Chinese are fine with bending the theory. They're fine with moving around the theory because reality exists. And you have to make decisions that exist within reality. So I think that, and I also think there is an element of Marxists tend to believe that they are morally superior. And that's usually because Marxists are morally superior. Hey, dunk. But Marxists, you see this happen all the time where Marxists try to prove to other Marxists that they are more morally pure than the other. And so there's like a one-upsmanship that happens, which is a deadly game. And so there's a lot of reasons, I think, why people get heated about these things. I think there's a lot of reasons why there's a lot of heat. And my general feeling for Western Marxists generally is that they need to stop. Like we've got to stop with this, with the moral purity, with the infighting, with the fighting amongst one another. We have to turn and look at who our actual enemy is. We have to maintain a system of criticism against the system of capital. Continue to inform other people about and raise class consciousness in order to get away from this system of capital that is obviously destroying us. And any conversations we have about the USSR, about China, about North Korea should be about how do we learn. That if we want to critique these places, then it's got to be funneled into this idea of, okay, well, how do we get away from that kind of thing? But the trouble is, and Western Marxists aren't immune to CIA propaganda. They're not. Like, especially in regards to China. Like, it's very. I've encountered people who I respect, but when you get talking about China, it's like very clear that they don't know the first thing about what's going on in China, and that they're just getting their information from the BBC or something. And like, you take a look at how China is structured, you take a look at their constitution, you take a look at their government system, you take a look at the statements that are made at the National People's Congress. It's very, very difficult for me to accept that these guys are not moving forward on Marxist principles. It just doesn't look like what the Westerner thinks it looks like in their own imagination. And if I've got to choose between what people who are actually living in reality, actually enacting Marxist principles in reality and interacting with reality are saying and how they're moving forward, versus the imagination of a Western Marxist that's never experienced a revolution, that's never experienced the building of an actual communist society, that's never experienced any of that, I know which one I'm going to take more seriously. I know which one's the master in that conversation, right? Like, it would be like if I had to choose between someone like Magnus Carlsen, like in the game of chess, someone like Magnus Carlsen who's played like 100,000 games, he's the most top-rated guy in the world, might be the greatest chess player that has ever lived, currently walking around right now. If I've got to choose between that guy and somebody that's read about chess and has read about a lot of theory and understands the game of chess, probably more than me, because he's read so much about it, but he hasn't played a game, I know which one I'm going to pay attention to. I know who the master is, right? And if the guy who's read a bunch of chess theory looks at a Magnus Carlsen game and critiques it and tries to say that Magnus Carlsen doesn't know what he's doing, then I know who the fool is in that conversation, right? We have to accept that the Chinese and the Chinese Marxists are the masters. Like, they know what they're doing. Obviously, they know what they're doing. And if you throw your hands up as a Western Marxist and you say, oh God, they've conceded, it's just state capitalism, it's just this, well, then guess what? The Chinese love it. That's why it's such a losing position from the Western Marxist idea, to critique China as if, well, what they're doing is wrong, and here's why, I read it in a book. Well, then you still lose. Because even if you confirm your position, even if it is in fact the case that China is state capitalist and they're not this, that, and the other thing, well, then you lose. You know why you lose? Because the people of China love it. Anytime you ask them, the people of China are like, yeah, what's going on here is great. We love it. 90% approval rating. We have a 35% approval rating of our system. We have a 35% approval rating of our system. The Chinese have a 90% approval rating. So if it is state capitalism, then we got to do some state capitalism. Straight up. Like, straight up. Like, I want to live in a society where 90% of the people are happy with their government. I would love to live in a society where 90% of the people are walking around going like, this is great. Oh man, this is great what's happening. Right? I'd love to live in that society. Like, but we're just choosing not to, and we're choosing to fall into kind of a moral purity and a sort of religious fundamentalism that I do think is fundamentally rooted in the unfortunate and real position that they're not white, therefore they're inferior. And more I do think that is sort of the backbone of all of it. That once you concede that, oh, these people are the same as us, then you start to understand, like, okay, like, they actually have something interesting to say and we can actually learn something from them. But we're just choosing not to. We're just choosing not to, and instead we're choosing to bicker, well, refusing to organize, and refusing to accept that, like, I think people are hoping that there is going to be a nonviolent way out of this. I think people are hoping that there is going to be a way that we're going to get out of this without some kind of actual, real revolution. And it's just not going to happen that way. Like, that's the hard reality. That's the hard pill to swallow. Everyone hopes that we'll be able to negotiate our way out of it, or that we'll be able to elect or vote our way out of it. Everybody's sort of hoping that that's the case, and it's just not going to go that way. that the system of capital has 100% organized itself against us and will 100% use violence to maintain its position. Like, here's a great article that's sort of indicative of what I'm saying, right? Find out if your MP is a landlord or invested in real estate. This is from the Maple, right? They did an investigation to find out how many MPs are actually, let's see if I can open this image and get a better look, right? So here's the list of all the MPs, right? And when you take a look at MP landlords and real estate involvement, right? You find out landlord, but no reported income, right? Or landlord, but no reported rental income, right? Owns non-residential property, owns non-residential landlord. And if you go down this list, you find out all of these guys are landlords, or they own non-residential properties, so they're like a commercial landlord, and none of them are not. All of them are in some way or another a landlord, and so they're never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, going to actually vote in order to improve the quality of life for the people who they own, because they are the ones that are making the rules, right? They've bought into the system of capital. They've bought into the system of serfdom. They've bought into the slave system that capitalism actually is, and they're never going to improve that. And moreover, in order to even get into this position, you have to have already done that. So so this is what we are actually fighting against, and they're not going to allow us to vote it away. They're never going to allow us to vote it away. And so once we start to experience real collapses, not just a generalized collapse, but a real collapse, and to pretend like we're not is foolish, then we're going to really, really have to start having serious discussions about how we fight back against this. Here's something that I love to show to people. The Great Depression time period, based on the United States Internal Revenue Report for the end of the calendar year, December 31st, 1930. The average net yearly income of Americans during 1930 was $4,887. If you, what is that worth in today's money? If you put that into an inflation calculator, you find out that the average income for a person during the Great Depression in America was $84,000. What's the average income in America today? $56,000. So we are already, right now, in a worse position than we were in the Great Depression. We are going to experience generalized collapses. We are going to experience generalized collapses. We're going to experience the collapses of healthcare systems. We're going to experience the collapses of retirement systems. We're going to experience the collapses of social safety nets. We're going to experience collapses of major institutions, Walmart. We're going to experience huge collapses of systems that we rely on, and huge sections of the populace are going to be abandoned. Enormous sections of the populace are going to be abandoned. Huge, huge tent cities. Huge, huge fentanyl crisis. Huge, huge spikes in crime. Huge, huge organized fighting amongst groups. We're going to see an enormous generalized collapse across America because you can't run a society this way. You just can't. That all of the poverty and all of this despair and everything that's happening right now is going to expand, and that's what we need to be fighting against, and that's what we need to be talking about. And I think socialists get really heated about things like the USSR, China, or North Korea because they're projecting. Because they don't want to actually take a look at what's happening in their own society, and they don't want to actually take a look at how those countries were successful in their communist revolutions, because they don't want to admit what it's going to actually take. But once it starts to happen, that's what's going to happen. But because I think we refuse to have foresight on it, we're going to have to experience it. We're going to have to see it for what it is. Like, we're going to have to see it for what it is. And this is why I say that America is heading for 100 years of humiliation. That we are going to see, like, the CIA is going to spread the fentanyl crisis. the society is going to experience massive collapses. There's going to be a period of naked fascism, just like a complete naked fascism, where the society is absolutely going to consume itself, where, because it's going to be a Christianized fascism, it is going to be very much like straight white men are in charge, and if you're not a straight white man, then you're a second-class citizen. It is going to take on that tenor. It's going to be extremely anti-immigrant, extremely anti-Muslim. It's going to be a generalized like terror state that's going to believe that what it's doing is enacting a crusade on behalf of Jesus Christ, who's certainly coming back, and and we're not prepared for it. There is no counter movement to it. Nothing serious, in fact. Most people don't really believe that it's going to be as serious as it actually is going to be. And if they do believe that it's as serious as it is going to be, they don't actually know what to do about it. Or they're not willing to do anything about it. And what you need to be doing at this stage in the game is joining local groups and organizing locally. Like literally with your neighbors. You need to be knocking on your neighbors' doors. You need to be setting a time once a month. This is something I want to do for myself. You got to set a time once a month where you have a meetup group and you just all get together, not to fight one another, or debate one another, or any of that kind of stuff, but just to be together, just to have an organization of where you're coming together and organizing together and trying to figure out how to move forward through this absolute catastrophe that we are definitely going, that we are definitely already experiencing, but that we're definitely going to continue to experience. And I haven't even gotten into climate change. Like when the water levels come up, like you're looking at like huge, massive, like millions upon millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of people falling into migration patterns and needing to move. Like it's gonna be enormous. It's gonna be complete and total catastrophe. And you think the Western world is going to be like, oh my goodness, all of these people are in distress and we need to rationally move resources and do all this kind of stuff? Or do you think they're going to withhold resources and jack the prices? Which one of those two things do you think is actually going to happen, right? So that's the whole reason why I do this. That's the whole reason why I continue doing this, is to really try to put it in people's minds that you got to organize with your neighbors. You got to be knocking on your neighbor's door. You got to be like setting a time at a pub for everybody to get together and meet. You got to like it is the thing that must be done. Like if you're sitting there going like, I don't know what to do, well now you do. And so now the choice isn't now the statement isn't I don't know what to do, it's do I do the thing that I know what to do. And if you don't, then just say you're not interested. Just say that you're just crying in your cups and you're just and you're here to just sort of find some sort of existential catharsis. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't pretend like you don't know what to do, because you do know what to do. You set a time once a month, make it consistent, at a pub, do a local meetup group, get people there so you can actually have a conversation about what to do about this collapsing system. And if enough people actually show up to that, then you've got a political force. Then you've got something where you can actually go to the prevailing ruling class and say, hey, this is what we want, and if you don't do it, then we're not going to vote for you. And if you appeal to the vanity, because that's all we have at this point, if you want to actually interact with the electoral system, like this is the electoral solution, right? Quote unquote solution. You have to appeal to the vanity, and you have to appeal to, because all electoral politics is just vanity projects at this point. It's all vanity projects at this point. It's a conservative or a liberal saying, I want to be the leader. I want to be this person, right? And nothing else. They're not interested in helping anybody. They're not interested in that. They just want to be the person. That's it. That's Donald Trump is the key of this. He doesn't care about helping anybody or having power to do anything. He wants to have power so that he can say, I'm the president. That's it. That's all he wants. I'm the president. And if the people around him are saying, hey, you need to do a Muslim ban, he's going to go, okay, does that mean I get to be the president? That's it. That's it. And so I think we got to let go of a lot of this bickering or pretending as though we have the moral position or the expertise to actually critique the people of North Korea, China, and the USSR, and instead start focusing on what we have to do. And what we have to do is what the people of the USSR and China and North Korea actually did, which is foment a real revolution. Like there's nothing else. There's nothing else. And I do think it's going to have to take people to actually see that, oh, we are ruled by psychopaths. Like these people are actual, like literal, crazed, lunatic, Skeletor level psychopaths who have become completely unhinged. They weren't very hinged to begin with. Like most of them are Nazi sympathizers or pedophiles or at the very least willing to enact a system of slavery in order to enrich themselves. Like they're all like this, but it's going to become naked. It's going to become naked, where these people are going to just snidely, and not only is it going to become naked, it's going to become part of the popular discourse. Like, imagine someone like Homelander. This is the example I always give. In the show The Boys, there's a character named Homelander who's supposed to be a critique of superheroes. Supposed to be like, what if a superhero actually existed? What if somebody like Superman actually existed? And Homelander is basically a Nazi, right? And you're supposed to understand that when you look at it. You're supposed to go, oh my goodness, oh no, oh dear, I am so concerned that this Homelander guy is a Nazi. Well, it won't be much longer now until the system of power begins to regurgitate figures like Homelander in front of us, who are Nazis, that we're supposed to think are the protagonists. That we're supposed to look at someone like Homelander and go, he's the good guy. He's fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. That they'll do a Superman remake, and Superman will basically be a Nazi, but he'll be our guy. And truth, justice, and the American way, and what Superman says goes, because he's big and strong and powerful. Might makes right. And we're very close to that already. A lot of the Marvel movies are essentially proto-fascist propaganda in the first place. There's the major ethos of most of the Marvel stuff is that might makes right, that we should worship strength, that anybody that's not a white American is a threat. These generalized principles that exist across a lot of our media are just going to become very naked and very open and very obvious. Anyway, Adam, that was a huge diatribe I just went on, but boy howdy. I've been listening to Chris Hedges again. And he always gets in my ear, and like I feel very inspired by him. Midnight Rose says, lately I've been at least openly declaring myself a Marxist in online spaces, including social. The kind of people that want nothing to do with me are the people I don't want to talk to anyways. Yeah. But once you kind of realize that like, oh, the people who are kind of Nazis, the people who are kind of wanting to fight against you, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I don't want to be friends with a Nazi. So people do lose their mind at the word communist, though. Yeah. So I use Marxist, where I'm actually regularly talking to people and multiple times a week, not places like Twitter, for example. Yeah, not Discord either. Yeah, I think communist is a trigger word, right? Like, I think it is actually a literal trigger word, and it has been incepted in people. And it's so funny because most people don't know the first thing about communism. Like, they don't know the first thing. They literally are just like, communism fails whenever it's been tried. It's like, read Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. It's just not true. Like, communism works. That's the reason why the United States government spends billions of dollars a year to destroy it. It's the reason why the CIA exists, is to destroy communism, and they wouldn't do that if it didn't work, right? Like, why destroy something if it just fails? Like, why not just stand back and watch it fail? Why not just say, okay, this is why it fails, guys, and it's going to fail. Oh, goodness, it failed. And then just, like, extend a hand and be like, okay, it failed, so we're here to help and get you through it, right? Why not do that? If it actually failed, then just watch it fail. Instead, you're going to spend $100 billion to make it fail. Why? It fails anyway, right? But the reality is that the CIA and the State Department and the Pentagon, they know it works. They know it works, which is why they're afraid of it. Because they know that if the people of America and if the people of the West start to understand that communism actually works and that we're actually ruled by a pathetic, parasitical, psychopathic class of delusional narcissists who do nothing at all and provide no value for us whatsoever, that we'll actually recognize that we need to get rid of them and that we should actually restructure the society to never have them show up ever again. That's the threat. That's the reason why, quote unquote, communism doesn't work, because it doesn't work for them. That's the truth. I can't speak for all anarchists, but I expect MLs and Ms and anarchists are usually talking past one another. I think that happens too. Yeah, that's a good point. Plus, there's a lot of garbage from all tendencies online. Yeah. Well, I think the worst one that I see, and I'm seeing it from quite a few people online, is they clearly want to prove that they are smarter or better than you. That's really what it's about for some of these people. That they have found a theory that is rooted in a reality, and they like it, and they know that it's got a truth to it, and so they feel like, oh, I found it. I found the truth. And so they've become kind of fundamentalist about it, and so it gives them a kind of a meaning in their life, and rather than try to use it for what it's for, which is as a science in order to move a society forward, they're using it for themselves, to make themselves feel better about themselves, at the expense of everybody around them, frankly, at the expense of everybody around them. I suspect you can be hypnotized by a billboard. I don't know if it's direct hypnotism, Radio Halifax, but billboards have an enormous impact on the cultural consciousness. That, like, if you see a billboard, I think most people, when they see a billboard, they just accept that there's some kind of truth to it, right? That, well, if it was complete bullshit, it wouldn't be there. And I think most people, I've described this before, so I won't go too much into it, but I think it creates a type of in-grouping, that a person will see a billboard, and people's first inclination is not to say, that's nonsense, because they're worried they're going to turn to the guy beside them and say, that's nonsense, and that person will be like, what are you talking about? That's the smartest thing I've ever heard in my life. How dare you? What a loser you are. Get out of here. And then they'll be part of the out group. And people don't want to be part of the out group. People want to be in the in group, right? And so the best most people will do is they'll see something that they think is nonsense, and they'll turn to somebody and say, what do you think of that? Well, that's quite a thing, don't you think? Right? And then that person that they just asked that question to is afraid of that very phenomenon themselves. So they're not going to say that it's bullshit either, right? They're going to say, oh, well, that's quite a thing, I guess. I mean, I guess there's something to it. And everybody's sort of sussing out whether or not it's okay to call this thing bullshit. It's the emperor's new clothes phenomenon, that everybody just looked at the naked emperor and went along with it because that was the in-group. That was the in-group position. And it wasn't until a child stood up and said, that guy's not wearing any clothes, that everybody went, oh yeah, and the illusion was broken, right? And the illusion was broken. But in-grouping, and billboards have that effect. I don't think they have the exact hypnotic thing that I'm talking about, but I do think they create in-grouping, which is why they're used. I don't know of any serious anarchists who's advocating for social democracy that's antithetical to horizontal self-organization. Yeah, I think the people who are organizing and advocating for social democracy are more or less desperate. That desperation is the word that I would use. That if in today's society, if you are still standing and saying social democracy, social democracy, social democracy, it's because you desperately, desperately hope that we can negotiate our way out of it. That's more or less what I see. That the people who are supporting social democracy are crossing their fingers and hoping that the society will come to their senses and will negotiate our way out of it. And it's not going to go that way. That's not how it's going to go. So I don't hate them for it. I'm not like some people. Like, I take a look at somebody like Cornel West, for example, is a good example of this, or even somebody like Bernie Sanders, and I'm just like, I don't hate them for it. I'm not standing here being like, boo, what a bunch of losers, idiots, any of that kind of stuff. No, I understand. Like, I understand. They're desperate. They desperately hope that the ship will right itself. They desperately hope that we'll snap to our senses. They're desperately hoping that these psychopathic billionaires will actually have a come to Jesus moment. They're desperate. They're desperate because they know what happens if it doesn't go that way. They do know, right? So they're throwing their chips in this last ditch final hope that people will come to their senses, and they're not willing to concede yet. They're not willing to say, okay, it's not happening, right? They still got those fingers crossed. They're still sitting there being like, okay, maybe in the next election, Biden will win again, and then that'll create a cascading collapse throughout the Republican Party, and maybe the Republicans will have a restructure, and there'll be that kind of thing, and then maybe we can push Biden to the left, and then maybe in 20 years we'll be able to move this kind of thing, and it's just not going to go that way. Like, it's just not going to go that way. The society is fascist. We're pro-fascist. We love fascism. We're a huge fan of fascism. That the fascism is entrenched inside of our society. It just hasn't manifested politically fully yet. Although I would argue that the system of American capitalism is fairly fascist in the first place. But it hasn't become completely fully naked. It hasn't had the leader who's literally like, I am a fascist. That hasn't happened yet. Right? It will. Look, it will. That we will get a leader who stands up and writes essays and diatribes and makes speeches about how fascism is cool. Like, it'll happen. Yep, good news. Andrew Tate has been arrested on charges of rape and human trafficking. Yeah, always good news to hear that a rapist and human trafficker gets his just rewards. I'm going to say this for anybody who's out there listening generally. If you were an Andrew Tate stan and you really bought in to Andrew Tate and all of the things that he was saying, and you felt that there was resonance there and that you were going along with that, I think that first I'm going to say I forgive you. I think that it's okay to get grifted by a grifter, right? But you do got to take a pause. I hope that this takes you take a pause. I hope you take a moment and you actually think to yourself, man, I was really on the side of a rapist and somebody who was selling women and creating like a weird little cult in order to rape and sell women. Like, and I was part of that. I was on board with that. I was nodding along with that. I was going along with that. I hope that you take a moment to really think about that. And to really think to yourself why that's the case. Why are you going along with that? Why is it that this guy was able to come along and say the things that he was saying and you were on board with it and you were going along with it? Like, really do some soul searching on it. Take a look in the mirror and really think about it. Because while I respect and understand that people get grifted, right? There are grifters everywhere. Most people in the society are grifters today because that's what's rewarded. But that one in particular, Andrew Tate in particular, is one that I think should give you pause. Should give you pause. Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. Don't just shrug and be like, oh well, and move on. Like, accept that you were attracted to that and really start asking yourself why. Compton writes, the only horizontal self-organizing I've ever seen have success is me and your mom doing some horizontal organizing. Yeah, Compton. You had me for a minute, dude. I thought, oh, here's a good comment from Compton. He's going to say something really profound. It was profound in a way, I suppose. QTYA, I think I've seen you here before. I don't know if I have. I recently found out I'm stressorist. Any opinion about that? Your shirt looks cool. Bud, if I am not mistaken, Stratersist is is an offshoot of Nazism. Stressorist. Yeah, it's a strand of Nazism, my man. Like, no. Like, come on, man. Like, what do you think I'm going to say about this? Like, what do you actually think I'm going to say about this? Like, let's not bullshit each other. Like, what do you actually think my opinion is actually going to be about this? That I'm going to look and be like, oh, a strand of Nazism calling for a more radical mass action. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting. This looks credible and serious. Like, I have been recorded and have said aloud, it's completely fine to shoot Nazis. It's fine. Like, completely fine. I actually think you're a hero if you do it. I think that we should give people medals. Like, if a guy's walking around with a Nazi swastika and somebody pulls out a gun and shoots that guy, I think we should give that guy a medal. Like, he shouldn't go to jail. He shouldn't be considered a criminal or a deviant or any of that kind of stuff. We should consider him a hero and he should get a medal. So what do you think I'm going to say about this? Oh, but John, it's, there's a lot of... No, there isn't. There really isn't. There really, really isn't, bud. You got to rethink this. You got to rethink this. You shouldn't be proud of it. And you shouldn't be happy that you found out that you were that. You shouldn't be happy about it. You should not be happy about it. At all. Like, if you did a quiz and the quiz spat out that that's your worldview to you, it's time to do some soul searching. It's time to read some books. It's time to find some empathy. You should read the works of Shakespeare. You should read some Chris Hedges would be good. You should read the Communist Manifesto, right? You should probably read the Bible. Actually read the thing, like actually read it, as opposed to what Christians do, which is pretend like they read it. Or like, I don't know, go on a pilgrimage. Find a spirit quest. Do something. Because if you're doing a quiz and finding out that you're a Nazi, there's only two roads for you, my man. There's only two roads for you. You got to get out of it. Get out of it soon. The biggest critique I have with China is the stance towards LGBTQ or LBGTQ. Yeah, I mean, every society is going through its own conversation about that. And right now, my position is that the West is not helping. Like, if you are actually a member of or an ally to the LGBTQ community, you got to understand that the West is not helping internationally at all. That the empire is spreading this idea of LGBTQ across the world while dropping bombs. It's not a good look. And it's reasonable for other nations who are having their children slaughtered by a system screaming it's okay to be gay to say maybe it isn't. So if you are an LGBTQ ally, you have to be anti-imperialist. You have to condemn what the American empire is doing, because if you don't, then the rest of the world is going to backfire on you. And it's going to be like, it's not okay to be gay. Look at what happened in America. Look at this, right? And China and Russia and all of these places haven't had the same kind of societal revolution, but they can happen. You take a look at Cuba, for example. Cuba recently passed legislation that was pro-LGBTQ, and it can happen, and it does happen. But these things take time, and for us, for Westerners, to kind of grandstand on that issue to other societies that don't have an organized movement, that haven't had a big revolutionary change in that way, while we're simultaneously dropping bombs on people, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yeah, and I tend to agree with the LGBTQ issue is more cultural baggage than anything to do with communism or their politics. I think that's right. And it'll take time. Just like anything else, it'll take time. Hey Jade, how you doing? QTYA, the strategist, the stressorist. I'd love to hear your opinions on both Christo-anarchism and Straterism. So Straterism is Nazism, so you should get rid of it. You should purge that from your life as fast as you possibly can. I don't think there's such a thing as a Christian in America. Not really. Like, I think that there's two strands of quote-unquote Christian, which is essentially the Christian fascists who are using Christ as an icon in order to in-group with one another, to just sort of say, we're this group, therefore we're good, and everybody else that isn't this in-group is bad. It's extremely dangerous, and they're rising to power, right? And by no definition that I can see are they actually Christian. They don't read the book. They're strikingly illiterate. They don't care about Christ. If Christ showed up and started talking to them, they would kill him. They despise their Christ and everything he stood for. And this is the majority of Christians in America, if you ask me. So the idea that these people are Christians is a joke, utterly. And because they exist, it makes the people who don't think that way look like weak losers, right? That if you actually were a Christian, if you actually believed in Christ, if you actually thought that Christ was the keenest, coolest guy around, so much that you're willing to dedicate your life to a pursuit of Christ, then you should be actively condemning, actively going out and fighting against these Christian fascists, and you don't. Nobody does, right? Because they're not Christians either. They're just people who are sort of holding on to Christ as an eat, pray, love sort of thing. They're just like, oh, I love my Jesus. I love my Jesus. Well, fellow Christians out there in the world, today we're here to celebrate another day of Jesus Christ. All we're doing right now is we're just wasting time waiting until the moment when we die, because this place is a burning cesspool, and we all know that things will be so much better when we're all dead up in heaven with Jesus Christ. Don't worry, this isn't a death cult. This is a serious thing that people believe. That there's a magical wizard up in the sky looking down on you thinking that it's bad that you masturbate. But you better think to yourself that Jesus Christ is real and he's in your heart, and all you got to do to support the spread of his message is put $1 in an envelope and send it to the board below. There's an envelope on the table, and you got to write the check and make it sure and send it and beg it that these are more or less... Oh, what happened? Oh, violent behaviors or criminal activities. Yeah, there we go. I got a ban on TikTok again. Yeah, as is expected, right? Man, the CIA is really on board. Yeah, we'll appeal it. It's not going to happen. Submit. Yeah, you'll no longer go live. Yeah. Yeah, guys, if you tell the truth about the nature of your society, you'll just get banned, right? Like, that's why we'll never be able to organize a revolution on these platforms. Right? You'll never actually be able to organize a revolution on these platforms, because these are, like, TikTok is NATO owned, right? TikTok is owned by NATO. It's run by NATO, and it's going to be... so what we have to do is organize locally, like I've been saying before. It's the only thing that's going to work. Like, it is the only thing that's going to work. I don't know what link you're referring to there, Eric. Anyway, to finish this up, QTAY, I think that you are either calling yourself a Christian because you're a Nazi, or you're calling yourself a Christian because you see Christ in kind of an eat, pray, love sort of way. That's not much different than, like, getting your moral guidance from Harry Potter. Like, I've never met a Christian. I don't know who these people are. I've met a lot of people who say that they're Christians, but that Christ would literally look at and be like, what? You're a fucking joke. If this is a representative of Christianity, stop calling yourself Christians, because you're not, like... If I was Christ and I was like, here, Son of God, Jesus Christ, magic powers, water to wine, I can walk on water, Jesus Christ, I'd be looking at this society and being like, oh, these people are all frauds, and these people are all cowards. None of them are Christians. I reject all of them. And I would be building a movement without them, frankly, because I think that they're worthless. So stop calling yourself a Christian, because you're not, right? Not, like, Christ certainly wouldn't think you're a Christian. And stop especially as you're walking around calling yourself a Nazi or a Strasserist, right? Like, get that shit out of here. Quit it. Like, quit it. The one about the Great Depression. It is actually in the Discord, Eric. But sure. Sure. Man, getting banned on TikTok again, man. It sucks to live in a Nazi society, man. Actually, the pre-Nicene Christians were very much anarchists. Yeah, so what? 1,300 days ago. Tinker, good to see you, bud. I think these socialists like to believe they've ascended beyond national borders and see everything in class, but they underestimate how much their nationality still influences them. I think that's right, Ligon to Z. I think that's right. That, like, and we're not immune to it. Like, we're not immune to it. Like, everybody has that kind of gut perspective, right? That takes a lot of effort to get above it. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't. It's just the truth. Yeah, you literally aren't, dude. Like, you're not. I'm sorry, man. Like, you can't be a Nazi and a socialist. Like, oh, but the dead and Nazi is for social. It's a joke. Like, it's a joke, my man. It's a joke. Yeah, being slaughtered by woke rainbow bombs. They can have those social movements once U.S. hegemony is no more. Schizo poster. Don't know if I've ever seen you here before. Thoughts like people like Adrian Arcand. I don't think I know Adrian Arcand. But we've already had a Nazi in the chat. So why not have another one? Canadian journalist, politician for advocating fascism. Yeah, I'm glad he's not around. There you go. Easy. Like, easy. Like, I don't know what you guys are expecting me to say about these guys. You're expecting me to have, like, a big, like, nuanced perspective of, like, well, you know, he advocated for fascism, but no. Like, no. Like, I'm happy that he is dead. Goodbye. Farewell. I hope something bad happened to him. Like, I don't know what to tell you. If you're actually going to stand up and say fascism's great, then I think that you're an enemy of humanity, and that if something bad happens to you, then that's good. So, next. Vietnam has laws in the world right now that would enshrine trans rights and gender-affirming care too. They might be next after everything Cuba has done. Yeah, it's completely possible that, like, these sorts of things start to cascade in a larger and larger way, right? Because, like, it is quite self-evident, like, that people are not choosing to be gay. People are not choosing to be trans. Like, these aren't choices that people are making. They're not standing up one day and saying, you know what, today I think I'll just choose to be attracted to men. Like, it's just not how it works at all. And as we're moving along, and as the issue is getting more and more oxygen, and as people are calming down more and are more willing to actually listen to what's going on, it just becomes more and more obvious that it's quite self-evident. And that to me is the entire thing, the self-evident nature of it. That it's not a choice. No one would choose this, right? Why would anyone make this kind of a choice? I remember one time I listened to a black lesbian, and she said it outright. And this was back when I was still somewhat Christian and somewhat fascist in my own worldview. Hold on a second, guys. I gotta get my dog again. Dude, twice, eh? It's gotta be the heat, eh? Here, I got you, buddy. I got you, buddy. Let's just take care of this, okay? Yeah. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy, buddy. Good boy. Still got it, eh? Sit. We gotta get it, dude. Let's get it. You're a good boy. Aren't you the best? You're such a good boy. We gotta do this. Sorry, dude. Good boy, buddy. Good boy, my man. Good boy, my man. You're right. Let's give you a proper treat. Let's give Milo a proper treat. Let's give Milo some peanut butter to eat. Let's do it, 'cause he's a good dog with a tiny face that's like a frog. Let's do it. He's such a good boy. He's such a good little boy with a tiny face like a frog. He's such a good boy. There you go, my man. Go to town. You know, that TikTok ban is really funny. Because essentially all I'm advocating for is self-defense, right? That's all it is. That people are going to need to defend themselves against the system of capital. And you see the system of capital ban people for saying out loud that we should defend ourselves. That's essentially what's going on, right? That the system of capital is allowed to abandon people, destroy people, impoverish people, literally go to war with people. But if you say we should fight back, right, we should defend ourselves, you get banned. That's how the system works. That's the system of capital. It sucks living in a Nazi society. And it sucks that the new people who are coming in are basically pro-Nazi. It's really weird. Yeah, QTYA, I'm gonna lay it out for you, my man. Like, it sounds to me like you're sort of confused about what's going on, which is why I'm not really, like, upset with you being here. The like, you gotta do a full pivot 180 turn away from Nazism. Like a full pivot 180 turn. Like, these guys literally are saying that one of the major troubles with the society is that there are small minority groups that we need to round up and purge. Like, that's not something that you should be taking seriously in your consciousness. That's not something that you should allow to corrupt your consciousness. That you gotta get into a place where you understand. Like, if you don't understand anything, you've got to understand this. Because this is fundamentally, inarguably, hardline the truth. You are a randomly generated person who did not ask to be where you are, just like everybody else. And from this system of random generation has arisen something we call culture. That culture is what persists from those who are randomly generated in the geographical area. That there's a persistent culture. And if you are going to condemn one of these randomly generated cultures over your own, then you are engaging in a type of lunacy. You're engaging in a type of diseased thinking. That every single person is simply trying their best. And that they believe, most people believe, that what is going on around them is probably fine. It's probably okay. But if you are looking at other minority groups and tearing them down, it's because you're projecting something inside of yourself onto them. And it is your duty as a human being to investigate why you are doing that, to investigate that projection, and to try to find out for yourself why it is you are projecting onto those people. Why it is that you are projecting onto those people. And most of the time it's going to be things like guilt and shame, despair, disgust, that these emotions are too difficult for people to deal with internally, and so they project it onto someone else. It's extremely common. It's extremely common. And so you just sound like a confused young man. Well, one of the ways to alleviate that confusion is to admit to yourself fully, right in this moment, that you don't know what's going on, that you are a randomly generated person, that the circumstances that are going on around you are completely randomly generated, that any institutions that exist were created by people who they themselves were also randomly generated, and that any hatred or despair or disgust that you have towards a group that is an outgroup to the one that you are in is illegitimate on the face of it, because that group is also randomly generated, and that group also has probably experienced some trauma, and that group is also probably dealing with something. And so the best thing for us to do with one another is to move forward with an idea that we call love, that we attempt to understand what's going on to the degree that we can, as if everybody is what they are, which is a randomly generated life form that doesn't really understand what's happening. And until you embrace this view that you don't know what's going on, you are randomly generated, everybody else doesn't know what's going on, they themselves are also randomly generated, all of the ideas that we are having are just monkeys grabbing at straws, trying to cobble together an idea. And the idea that we've cobbled together is probably just as good as the idea that anybody else has cobbled together. Like, until you embrace this view, then you're just going to be an asshole. It's as simple as that. You're just going to be an asshole, and all an asshole can do is spit out shit. That's all an asshole can do. And so if you want to ascend to not being an asshole, then get rid of this Nazi bullshit. In today's society, stop trying to find truth in Christ, because that doesn't really exist anymore in this society. Right? Just accept the fact that everybody's kind of just making it up, and just do your best. You'll do fine. Yeah, the Russian Communist Party in Russia support Putin's stance on anti-LGBTQ policies, yeah. Jaone, I don't know if I've ever seen you here before, Jaone. I don't think it's fair to characterize the Bible as good. Jesus told parables about beating and torturing slaves. Yeah. So what often happens, Jaone, is the Bible is a cultural document. Like, I think that if you're walking around saying Jesus was a wizard and that wizard said things and that means that it's true 100% because God wrote this book with his hand and there's a wizard that's coming back at any moment. Like, if you're talking that way, that, like, I understand why you would say these things, right? That, like, because people are using the Bible, and not just like kooks and fringe people, but like people who are taking power are holding up the Bible as like a literal document that should be read as like an instruction guide, right? That, like, well, Jesus said this, and so we've got to 100% completely commit to this whatsoever. The Bible is a cultural document, an important cultural document, a strong and powerful cultural document from a secular position. It is a powerful and important secular cultural document. And it should be investigated and it should be understood that way. That as soon as you take off the fetters of magic is real, as soon as you stop trying to understand the book as if it's supposed to be a divinely inspired, written by an angel, Jesus Christ is coming back, and all that kind of stuff, as soon as you unfetter it from this fundamentalist heretical nonsense and actually begin to understand it for what it is, which is a cultural document written by a people during a period of time, you understand very quickly that it's actually a very progressive book. It's an extremely progressive book. That it was written in the Roman Empire, where crucifixion was legal. Not only legal, but practiced. That one of the major inspirations, obviously, of the Christ narrative is Spartacus. At the end of the Third Servile War, Spartacus and 10,000 men are crucified along the Agrippa Way, so that new slaves coming in from Gaul will see 10,000 crosses on their way from the port into Rome. It's a profound cultural moment, and the story of Christ being crucified is a profound cultural story, no doubt whatsoever. And most of the time what happens is that people will read passages like Luke 12:47 to 48 and say, oh, Christ is giving an edict. You have to do this or else you cannot be a Christian because Jesus is a wizard that has magic powers. And instead, once you understand what was actually going on in Rome at the time, you see that all Jesus is doing is accepting that slavery exists and that there is such a thing as slaves, and is more or less telling people how to just how to deal with it, how to live in a world where slavery exists, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, Luke 12 is the passage where Christ says, "Be good to your masters." That's probably what you're. Luke 12. Yeah, let's be specific. 47 to 48. Let's see. The servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. So, oh yeah, this is part of that larger story. So this isn't a commandment, right? It's not a commandment. It's a parable. It's so that he's using an analogy that people would understand living in a slave system to say that, to say exactly what he says. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. From the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. This isn't a guy standing up and saying, slavery is the best. Everyone do slavery. This is a person who understands that a system of slavery exists and that he is talking to slaves and who have experienced the outcomes of slavery in a society that openly crucifies people. Like, it's not a commandment so that 2,000 years later we go, slavery's the best. And same story with like Leviticus 25:44. Like, in the time that Leviticus is written, like, you're literally dealing with a barbarian nomadic tribe, like, straight up, who's attempting to make rules and laws and legislations for like people who are essentially like wandering, like we evolved from apes, and so the evolution from like ape to human, well, so Leviticus 25:44 comes in around that period of time, right? Like, and this isn't like apologism. I'm not trying to stand here and say that like, and this is why the Bible is the true word of God. I'm just saying that like, it's a cultural document that is written in a time for a people who live during a time, and that you don't read it to be like, and this is how I live my life because Leviticus 25:44 said that slavery is good, so slavery is good. No, you read it as a cultural document to understand where we were, where we are, and to point an arrow towards where we should go. That's the reason you read texts like the Bible. You don't read that. If you're reading the Bible as if it's like Jesus Christ said this to me, then you're suffering from some kind of diseased mind, like most Americans are. But if you actually read the Bible as like, oh, a group of like literal barbarians wandering a desert wrote some things, and then that gets passed down, and then that gets passed down, and then that gets passed down, and then that tradition continues through. Like, it's a tradition without a doubt, and that gets passed into the Roman Empire, and then and then there's a whole like Reformation movement amongst Judaism that comes out with this figure of Christ in order to try to push back against an obvious death cult. Like, the Roman Empire is brutal. The Roman Empire is brutal, and the story of the crucifixion of Christ is absolutely one of the most powerful stories ever written. No doubt. Like, no doubt. But if all you're going to do is sit there and read the Bible as if you're trying to be convinced that magic is real, then of course you're going to think that it's bad. Of course you're going to take that view. Like, of course you are. Like, if I read Harry Potter and everybody around me was trying to tell me that wizards are real, and that when Dumbledore says these things, we're all supposed to do it as without question, as if it's an edict from God, then I would probably think dimly of the Harry Potter books too. right? I'd probably think dimly of something like Lord of the Rings. If everybody was trying to convince me that, like, yes, there were hobbits and there was this big Mordor mountain, and so when Samwise says this, that we need to do it without question, I'd probably think pretty dimly of that book too. But we don't do that. Why? Because there's magic in it. We know it's not real. It's just indicative of how crazy we are as a culture, isn't it? It's just indicative of how insane we are, how disconnected from reality that we've become. That we pick up a book that literally has magic in it, and instead of reading it as we would literally any other book in the world, we're reading it as if it's like, this is the word of God! Magic is real! Jesus said that, so we live that way for sure! We've lost our minds. On an institutional level, we've lost our minds. Like, the rest of the world is looking at us going, oh, you guys have lost your minds. And it's because we've lost our minds. Like, we're reading books that have magic in them, trying to convince people that magic is real. So yeah, I think that I would hate a book too if the culture had taken a hold of it and was trying to convince me that magic was real. And that when somebody had a conversation about slavery, my interpretation of it wasn't, so slavery existed during the Roman Empire and Jesus was talking to slaves in order to try to teach them how to live with systems of slavery that they cannot overthrow, right? The servile wars showed the people of the Roman Empire that they could not militarily overthrow the system of slavery. 10,000 men were crucified to prove it. And so Christ is walking around telling slaves how to exist and persist and live with the reality of being a slave, and trying to move the cultural bar so that slavers understand that maybe slavery is not the greatest, and maybe we should move forward in another direction. And if you read it that way, you see very, very, very clearly that Jesus is an extremely progressive figure. So I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart, get rid of the magic, get rid of this fundamentalist bullshit, stop allowing fundamentalists to define the way you think about things. Stop allowing the people who are saying magic is real to define how you read things and how you understand things. Stop allowing frauds to define your reality, because that's all you're doing. That's all you're doing. That the Bible is actually a powerful text from a secular perspective. As soon as you understand that the magic isn't meant to be real. And if you're going to stand in front of me and say that it is, then you're just a loser. Like, you're just a dum-dum. That it's grow-up time. Like, that's okay for like a little kid to believe. Like Santa is real. Okay, cool, Jimmy. Whatever you say. Yeah, the presents show up under the tree. You got it. Right? But if you're still like, I will say, like, in this day and age, if you're still like 20, right? If you're still like 20, I was 25. So understand that. I was 25 before I got rid of this. So if you're still 20 in this day and age, it's time to let it go. It's time to let it go. It's time to grow up. It's time to understand. It's time to understand that magic's not real, that this text was written for a people during a specific period of time. It is an intensely powerful story, an incredible story, and it doesn't need to be anything more than that. American Christianism doesn't really exist. It's just a pedophile ring. Unlike in Europe, where the Catholic Church is, the pure and clean Catholic Church, no pedophile organizations going on in the Catholic Church whatsoever. Come on, bro. How much do you want to bet you got banned for saying it's okay to shoot Nazis? I think that's right, Rose. Like, we live in a pro-Nazi society. Like, it's as simple as that. I will share articles from the Ottawa Citizen where a writer is talking about how the Canadian government funded Nazis in Ukraine, and I'll get banned off of places for that. I've been banned on TikTok for that. So we're a pro-Nazi society. We are Nazi sympathizers. We organize with Nazis. We train Nazis. We fund Nazis. And if you talk about it, you get banned. Which means that we need to talk about it as often as possible. But most people in the society can't handle it. Jahoni's got some things to say, which I think we're going to have a nice conversation. The link about the Great Depression, Bibbidi, yeah, thanks. Hey, Nova Scotia, how you doing, bud? More like 1,700 years ago, but I do believe I can revive the true Christianity of the Bible. No. I don't think so, dude. I think that... Christianity will be cleansed. I think it'll go away. Because, really think about how Christianity came in, right? That before Christianity showed up, the prevailing religious ideas were the pantheon, right? The Roman pantheon. And that the emperor was a demigod. And that you had, figures like Jupiter. And, this was how people were communicating with one another. You could see it in all of their art and all of their plays and everything they were writing, right? And their structures, their architecture, right? And in the space of 300 years, all of that essentially gets cleansed. That Christianity, amongst others, Christianity is not the only one, but Christianity becomes the prominent one, takes over, right? In a very short period of time, 300 years, very, very, very short period of time. The culture and the society basically purges itself of the old gods and ushers in the new. And the same thing is going to happen to Christianity because it has completely lost its credibility. That it's no longer interested in being credible. That's the biggest thing to me. If Christianity was actually interested in being credible, then they would be feeding the poor, they would be housing the homeless, they would be actually doing the types of things that you would expect Christ to be saying. And then moreover, I think most people have stopped trying to understand the figure of Christ at all. I think that Christ is basically just an icon, just a little picture. Like it's either Christ on the cross, or it's the Christ with the hands, right? Or it's Christ throwing a football, or it's Buddy Christ. But nobody even gives a shit at all about who Christ was, what he said, what he believed, the types of doctrines that he was actually talking about. Nobody wants to accept that Christ's great commandment, the actual commandment that he actually gave, right, was love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And one assumes that he didn't mean unless you're trans. So I think Christianity will be purged and that another story will take its place. And I think the story that's going to take its place is the story of communism, is going to be the story of human advancement, is the story of humanity. That I think that that's the story that's going to take its place. And that Christ will become something that we sort of talk about the way that we talk about Star Wars, more or less. Just an interesting figure, another storybook character, right? But I think the institutions of Christianity have essentially assured its death, and I don't think it can recover. When capitalism starts to fail, fascism allows rich governments to desperately force control of consumerism, trade, profits, labor equals power. Yeah, I mean, yeah. You talking about Milo, my pug? My pug also do this backward sneezes. Yeah, we're pretty lucky with Milo. Milo, his snout's a little bit longer. The reverse sneezing thing doesn't happen that often. It's easy to resolve. His breathing is okay. He's got good breathing. So We got pretty lucky with him. I don't think it's stated often enough how disastrous the destruction of the Institute of Sexology in Germany was for trans people. We might not even have these conversations today if it didn't happen. I think we would. I think that what we are experiencing, I think that what we are experiencing is a fascination that it goes beyond just simple bigotry. I think that what we are experiencing is a fascination, that people are entranced by what a trans person is, and so it's like it's a curiosity that is interacting with bigotry, and people are obviously entranced isn't even the right word. But people are obsessed with it. People are obsessed with it, and I think if the Institute of Sexology existed, I think that would still persist. Like, Americans are not literate, right? The fact that the Institute of Sexology would have existed, like, that just would have been another fascination, right? And that fascination is manifesting itself amongst the Christian right as a type of hatred, because they're projecting it. They're projecting their own sexuality outwards, as they always do. Trans porn is most searched in highly Christian areas. I think that's basically all you need to know about it. That trans porn is most sought out by people on the far right. Trester. The population has increased 3 times since the Great Depression, so probably 3 times the demand for housing, with 3 times less land per capita. Yeah, but it's not enough. Like, I don't really know what the critique here is. Like, it's not, like, we've built a lot of housing. There's a lot of housing that's empty, right? Like, we have enough houses to house everybody. That's really not the issue, even though the conversation has become that. That, like, we have the empty houses, it's just they're being hoarded by the rich. Thoughts on Greater Serbia? I don't know nearly enough to really comment on that, honestly, bud. I've been looking into ancient history. I think Sikhism was trying to do a version of that. They also don't believe any religion has absolute truth. Yeah, most religions will have some kind of offshoot where they are, like Gnosticism is like that for Christianity, where they're saying, like, yeah, we don't really have the absolute truth, and wait a minute, if Jesus is the Son of God, then why am I not the Son of God? Like, to me, that's the most interesting thing the Gnostics were saying, which is why they had to be stomped out, because the whole point of the church system became a bottlenecking of power and authority, right? You can't have everybody walking around believing that they speak with the voice of God, even though you obviously do. Right? You can't believe that everybody has access to moral authority. You can't have people walking around believing that, wait, I'm just as good as the priest. Like, what's the disparity here, right? You can't have people walking around believing that. People have to believe that, like, no, the Pope is an intercessor, so he's the one that has the connection, right? Because that's power, right? That's power. And so you can't have people walking around believing, like, wait a minute, like, I'm a randomly generated being that exists within the overall structure of creation that we call God. Why am I any different? Like, why am I any different? And the answer that you usually get from the fundamentalists is, well, Jesus did magic. Got it. It's hard not to hate, especially in these times, because of the crimes in Europe are committed by specific groups of people. I try to forgive them, but it's not easy at all. Okay, so I don't know what group you're talking about, but I almost guarantee that this is the story, my man. I almost guarantee that this is the story. That you are living in a white community that has a lot of wealth and prosperity because that white community has gone somewhere and stolen a lot of resources from people. And the people who you're stealing those resources from, and whose society that you've been destroying, have been fleeing and have been going places, and they're disrupted and they're trying to find their feet. And I almost guarantee that the society that you live in is doing everything it can to prevent that from happening at all. And so chances are extremely good that you live in a society that is blowing up the rest of the world and then pointing at the consequences of you blowing up the rest of the world and saying it's their fault. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about projection. I think probably the greatest projector of all time that I've ever seen is Sam Harris. Sam Harris literally tried to convince people that suicide bombing was unacceptable while we were literally bombing the country that it was happening in. So it's acceptable for us to go to a country and blow it up and blow it to pieces, but if they fight back with something like suicide bombing, then they're the ones that are immoral, right? And it's this type of thinking that chances are good that you just don't know the history of what's going on. Chances are good that you're not accepting the actions of your own nation and your own country against those people or people like them. And that you are simply staying in a lower state. That what you see with your eyes is all you know. Just look at the Lord's Prayer where it says, forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. Yeah. Paul commands slaves to obey their masters. The Bible and trade chattel slavery. I think what you're doing is confusing the acceptance of the institution of Christianity with slavery with like you're sitting there thinking Paul went slavery is good, as opposed to saying slavery exists and we have to deal with it. Because a slave that doesn't obey their masters gets crucified. Like, what's Paul supposed to say? Pick up a sword, murder your master. Well, then not only does the slave get crucified, so does Paul. Like, I've seen this particular point and this particular conversation a lot, and a lot. And it's just something that even... so when I was a fundamentalist Christian, I sort of thought this way, and as I've grown older, this is one of these things that have been maintained, is that these people are not walking around saying that slavery is the greatest thing that ever existed and we should always have slavery forever, slavery. They were existing in a society that was a slave society, and it wasn't going to stop being a slave society, and they had to deal with being slaves. Like, what were they supposed to do? Like, for real. Like, this is the actual question that I actually ask. And I actually do expect an actual answer. And I never get one. Because the truth is that, like, you're not actually thinking about it this way. Like, these people lived in a slave society where there were slaves, and if the slaves fought back, they were crucified. What are they supposed to do? What are they actually supposed to do? You tell me. The reason I bring it up is because it's historically important to know. See, it's like that Jesus was complicit in the slave trade. What a joke. Like, that's a joke, dude. Like, Jesus was not complicit in the slave trade. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is true. Hundreds of Christians in the American South wrote biblical defenses for chattel slaves, which is why there's no such thing as a Christian, right? Like, these people are reading this book as if it's a magical document, instead of understanding that it's a cultural document written by people who literally, like, and do you actually think that, like, Paul and the writers of the Gospels were sitting there being like, in 2,000 years, people will read this? Like, are you kidding me? Chances are extremely good that when Paul's writing those letters, he thought that they were going to get burned. Like, this idea that the authors of the Bible are sitting there being like, this will be a universal doctrine that will persist through all time forever ad nauseum. In 1,000,000 years, the word of God will... Probably not. Like, probably not. Like, I bet you the authors of those books, if they showed up today, they'd be like, what? What? What are you what? What are you talking about? The letter that I wrote to the Corinthians that one time is in this book? Are you kidding me? No shit. Like, I just think that people who talk this way are allowing the frauds to define the way they think about it. And I don't know why you're permitting that. I don't know why you're permitting that into the way you think about things. That you are permitting a fraud to define something for you. I don't understand it. Someone said the modern Bible is simply the books of Leviticus and Revelations, bookending the Left Behind series of novels. That's hilarious. Yeah, the curse of canon made by Noah was literally invoked at the cornerstone speech by the Confederate vice president to justify religious slavery. Right. Big shocker, right? Like that fraudulent people and slaves and slavers want to continue the process of slavery. Like, big fucking shocker. And they'll use any justification whatsoever. Like, if I stood up and said, Harry Potter, in Harry Potter, the house elves are slaves, and therefore slavery is good, in a speech somewhere. Like, I don't, because that's more or less what's going on, right? Like, just because, like, Christianity is a big deal doesn't mean it is actually any different than that. And it doesn't mean that, it just means that we live in a society of grifters and frauds. That's what it means. Like, you're choosing to condemn the book instead of the guy that actually made the speech. Which I find to be interesting. It's an interesting choice. That the blame lies not on the man that made the speech, but on the book. That seems like a very odd position to take, in my view. I mean, and I'm not fighting you on any of this. Like the Bible was the basis for the rules of chattel slavery and the antebellum. So yeah, like, slavers use any document. Like, if they had had access to the works of the Buddha, they would have done the same thing. If they had access to like murderous slavers will use anything that's at their fingertips in order to justify their murderous slavery. Like, and they just happen to have the Bible. If it had been the works of Charles Dickens, they would have done the same thing. I also think it's worth remembering that neither the Bible nor Christianity were exceptionally culturally unique. Yeah, they were successful, but very few beliefs are actually truly unique. Yeah, I think that's true. Like, Christ, the moment you understand who the figure, read the stories of Dionysus. As soon as you read the stories of Dionysus, you're like, this guy's Jesus. Like, Dionysus is Jesus. And that seems extremely intentional by the authors. Like, Christ is literally turning water into wine. Dionysus is the god of wine. Christ dies and resurrects. Dionysus dies and resurrects. Like, Christ is a very Dionysian figure. And Dionysus is exactly the right figure because Dionysus is the god of wine and theater. That it's pretty clear that Christ is meant to be understood as a cultural figure, because I think the Christians, amongst other groups, were fighting a cultural war. And the reason why they're fighting a cultural war is because they understand they can't win militarily. They know that they have to win culturally. They know that if humanity is going to get out of the Roman Empire, if it's going to get out of this brutal system of slavery and crucifixion, it's got to do it culturally. They know this, right? And just because 1,000 years later some asshole stood up and made a speech about it doesn't mean anything. It just means that he's an asshole slaver, and you're just allowing him to define it for you. Yeah, Paul had a lot of issues for sure. One of the most interesting writings I ever saw about Paul came from a bishop called Shelby Spong is his name, in the Anglican Church, who actually wrote that he thinks there's enough evidence in Paul's writings to show that Paul was gay. And he makes a fairly interesting argument about it. That Paul is constantly writing about how there's this thorn in his side, and he's got this, there's this thing that's plaguing him. And he's never really specific about it, and so it's been very speculative. But Spong makes the argument that Paul was probably gay. It's worth remembering that Jesus was a Jew, yeah, absolutely, and would have been aware about the rules of slavery in Leviticus and Exodus, as would Paul. They both witnessed slaves in their daily lives. Yeah, that's my entire argument. Jabby, how you doing? Jib Jabby. In the next life, the Nazi will be born poor and in an overexploited country that NATO has destroyed. I mean, if you want to get into the true existential truth of how I think this reality works, is that we are all the same energy. Like, we are all the same energy. And that you and I are actually speaking to one another with the voice of God, trying to create a understanding of one another and a cultural understanding of one another, and that cultural understanding of one another, or that understanding of one another, needs to be understood from that sort of position of equal validity, that we're all randomly generated beings trying to deal with what we're dealing with, and that I will live your life as you will live mine, and that the richest Elon Musk will live the life of a cobalt miner, right? Like, that's the truth of the reality that we live in. We're all a singular energy. We're all talking to ourselves. Like, we are all one body. We're all part of the same thing. Like, and I actually think that's literally true. Like, that I think is literally true. That we are a singular energy attempting to understand itself, dealing with the illusionary nature of reality. And the thing that I think is most sad about our existence is that instead of attempting to actually discover why we're here, what we're doing, what it is we're here to accomplish, what is this thing anyway in the first place, instead of doing any of that, we're like scrabbling around for food and shelter. Like, it's very dumb. We're a very dumb society, because there's obviously so much more going on. There's obviously so much more to explore. There's obviously so much more happening around that we are very clearly meant to understand and very clearly meant to explore. But instead of that, we've just allowed some parasites to buy all the houses. Like, it's really quite pathetic. It's really, really quite pathetic. Dragon Fruit, did the TikTok stream go down? Yeah, it's because I said I think it's okay to shoot Nazis. I think that's probably what did it. Because I think it's completely fine. I think that if there is a Nazi around you and you shoot him, then I think you're a hero. So TikTok doesn't like it when people say it's okay to shoot Nazis. Because we live in a pro-Nazi society, pretty clearly. I live in Eastern Europe on a ranch. Oh yeah, not wealthy at all, dude. Full stop. Full stop. QTYA. I get this a lot from farmers and ranchers and those types of people. You are extremely wealthy. You're living on a ranch. A ranch. How many head of cattle? How many head of cattle? How many head of cattle? So I'm gonna put your feet on the ground here, bud. I'm gonna put your feet on the ground and open your eyes to a little bit of truth. Because if you're saying that kind of shit, then you're sleepwalking. You have no fucking idea what's going on in the world around you if you're saying that kind of shit. You live on a ranch. How many head of cattle? Chances are extremely good you're probably one of the richest people in the society. Walking around saying you're not wealthy at all. Get the fuck right out of here. You've got land. You got cattle. You got a steady income. And of course you still got to work fixing cars and welding, probably because your dad doesn't want you to be a loser. Probably because your dad wants you to know things. Wants you to figure some shit out. Because you're a minor. Now's the time. Learn, figure things out. Figure out how to fix cars. Figure out how to weld. Figure out how to do some stuff. Dude, tell me how many head of cattle. Tell me how many head of cattle. You're assuming that the Jews didn't own slaves? Oh no, the Jews definitely owned. I mean, I say this without the kind of baggage that comes along with it, but the people who did crucify Christ were Jews. And the reason why they did that is because Christ upheld the law in the temple and didn't allow the capitalists to do their fraudulent bullshit. Like, Christ was critiquing primarily in the text Jewish society, right? Because it is a Jewish tradition, right? Like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were his primary antagonists, were Jewish sects, and he was kind of constantly dunking on them. And so the Jews definitely owned slaves, and they definitely were benefiting from the system of slavery and the system of empire that existed during the time. Paul could have easily commanded Jews to release their slaves. Could he have? What do you think would have happened to Paul if he had done that? Like for real, dude. Like, come on. You think that Paul could have stood up and said out loud in letters publicly to people, Jews, release your slaves, and nothing would have happened to him at all? Right? That literally all of the early Christians, all of the apostles are crucified or executed, with the exception of John. But yeah, Paul definitely could have stood up and been like, yeah, Jews, release your slaves, and that definitely wouldn't have got him crucified. For sure, right? Like, this is kind of what I'm talking about. Jesus could have commanded Jews to free their slaves. Like, could he have? Is that a serious and legitimate thing that could have seriously been said? Like, and what do you think would have happened to the people who did release their slaves? Like, this is more or less, I think we're finally hitting it here, Jahone. I think we're finally hitting the sort of unserious analysis that most people have of the Bible. Like, the Roman Empire would not watch people buy and release slaves in such a manner with no reprisal. Like, let's be really serious. That the Roman Empire literally fucking crucifies people. It crucified Christians for way fucking less than what you're describing here. And the idea that the writers of the text, the writers of the Bible, would just be like, yeah, just release your slaves. That'll be fine. And that the Roman Empire will not respond to that? Like, come on, bud. Come on. Like, the Romans understand what propaganda is. They understand what those sorts of statements mean for their power. That it's not going to go down that way. Like, it's straight up not going to go down that way. And the idea that Christ or Paul or any of these guys could actually write, yeah, just free your slaves, that'll be fine. It just defies the reality of the power structure that exists. And like perhaps they should lament the state of slavery that definitely exists, but that's essentially what the story's about. Like, that's the weirdest part about this conversation, is that the story is about Christ's crucifixion. Spartacus was a cultural figure who literally was crucified attempting to free slaves. The cultural connection is obvious, and it's pretty obvious to anyone who actually understands what it means to live in a slave society where people are crucified publicly, to see a story come out of there that is about a guy who gets crucified. The connection from Jesus to Spartacus is a single line. Extremely obvious. That Spartacus was crucified trying to free slaves in a slave rebellion. And that Christ's crucifixion would be understood in those terms. And to not purposefully not understand them in those terms is odd. John, thoughts about the Knights of the Golden Circle from the American Civil War times? Not many people know about them. Yeah, I don't know about them. Knights of the Golden Circle. Honestly, dude, it just sounds like another fucking circle jerk of losers, right? Like, it sounds like... That's the thing about these far-right losers. They're always just like, we're the paladins of the high-minded Masonic ritual. Like, they're cosplayers, man. It's like these cosplaying nerds that always get around and, like, do these kinds of things. Like, it's just an excuse to sit around and jerk off. It's ridiculous. Personally, as a Christian, the whole issue of slavery in the Bible has always been a huge trouble for me. God could have commanded people to free their slaves, even if we only deal with, well, because you're defining the book as if it's magical, and it's not. It's not a magical book. That it's a narrative story. Like it's like I know that people hear this and they think I'm being flippant. I am not. That it is very much like Harry Potter or Star Wars or any of these kinds of cultural stories. Like, there's magic in it. I don't know why we can watch Star Wars and understand, like, yeah, that's got magic in it. Like, it's not meant to be understood very literally. But we read a book that has literal magic in it, and we're all just like, that definitely happened. Like, no, probably not. Probably not that way, right? Like, it's a story. That's it. It's a story. And, like, people stand up and they're like, there's inconsistencies in the story. I'm like, yeah, because people are just telling it, right? There's, like, groups of people just telling this story. It's not like it's not like J.K. Rowling wrote a book and released it. It's like a bunch of people telling each other this story. It's not supposed to be consistent. Like, it was never meant to be consistent. Like, it's a story. A powerful story, an important story that persists for a reason. And understanding why it persists, I think, is the most important part. What happened with the legend of Gilgamesh and the Egyptian gods? Did Christian canon copy that events in your view? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, like, Christianity did a lot of amalgamation. Like, it pays to remember that, like, the Roman Empire would have been like a real melting pot. It would have been like a hodgepodge. That the Roman Empire was a slave state, that they were going around destroying places, kidnapping a bunch of people, and shipping them back to Rome. And so Rome itself would have been a real amalgamation of many different ethnic groups with many different religious views and many different ideas. And the Christ narrative is very much a hodgepodge of all of that. Like, some of the stories of Christ are straight up, very obviously an appeal to, like, Egyptians. Like, I can't give you the clearest example right now. I don't have it at my fingertips. But, like a lot of times there'll be, like, a story where Christ does a miracle. And if you were, like, an Egyptian, you probably would have seen this story of Christ doing that miracle and been like, oh, yeah, that's, like, raw. Like, straight up one-to-one correlation connection. And it's done completely on purpose. Completely on purpose. The early Christians were 100% doing this. They were 100% using Christ as a narrative in order to amalgamate many different worldviews. Like, that's really what Christianity was all about and why it was so successful ultimately. It's because it was taking a lot of disparate views and getting them all under a single umbrella. Which, like, again, is why the really the only commandment Christ ever gave, the great commandment, was love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. That's an incredibly powerful thing to say if your neighbor is someone who doesn't speak your language and is from a different country, right? Jahone says, also just to throw this out here, I deeply appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate that, Jahone. I'm clearly just heavily opinionated on this. Find it important to discuss. And Jahone, I like this discussion. I really do. I feel like you've been very respectful. That you are just putting forward, honestly, like a pretty common view. Like so I don't hate anything you've said here. I do think that fundamentally. And if I were to hope that you walk away from this conversation with one thought in your head, it would be this. I think that you are allowing frauds to define the way you think about this. And I think that you would be better off saying, putting all of that into a box and labeling it what the frauds think, and putting that over there, and then approach the subject with fresh eyes from your own perspective and to create your own opinion from that perspective. I think you would be better off, and I think you would get more out of it. I think that you would enjoy, and I also think you would enjoy the subject a lot more, frankly. That you should have a little box in your head that says the frauds think this. I think this. Because I don't see a guy that's actually formed his own opinion about that text. I see somebody who's allowing the frauds to inform his opinion. So hopefully that's what you walk away with that. Eric says, Testament, they could still have freed their slaves and have them live as equal. There was some pre-Nicene Christian, after all. Yeah, dude, look, there's a difference between, like, the praetor, Marcus Aurelius, not Marcus Aurelius, obviously, but like Praetor Marcus Big Dickicus decided to free his slave of 7 years so that this, that, and the other thing and all that kind of stuff, which would have been considered a scandal, but permissible, allowable, and like the underclass literally freeing themselves from slavery. I just think that there's a sharp distinction to be made there, that like the rich can do what they want, and technically, yes, it's legal to free your slave if you're a rich person who decides to free this one slave this one time, right? And that the system will take that on, and there'll be enough of that. One thing to really infuse this conversation with, by the way, because I actually really love talking about this stuff, Michael Parenti writes a book that nobody knows about called that's about Julius Caesar. And in the book, he makes the argument that the reason why Julius Caesar is assassinated, right? The emperor of Rome is assassinated is because he laid the framework for serfdom. That he created within the structure of the law the idea that slaves could no longer be bought and sold individually if they were in these sorts of compounds, that they were owned by the land. That if a slave worked for this industry, for example, or on this field, or in this kind of place, he created the law that said that slave cannot be bought as an individual. He's owned by the land, and that he goes in terms of ownership where the land goes, but that he can't be bought and sold or treated as a slave. And Julius Caesar laid that framework, and for the privilege of that, he was assassinated. That's the argument that Parenti makes. And so I just think it's really important for people to understand that when they're reading the Bible, that like the institution of slavery was extremely important to the ruling class. That they and the thing to learn, to go full circle and bring it into why I really actually do think this is important for people to know from this perspective, is that the Bible will show you what the ruling class is willing to do in order to protect its power and its privilege. That what the Romans were willing to do to the Christians in order to protect their system of slavery, the capitalists will do to us. to me, that's the reason why everything has fallen into this obfuscationary nonsense, and why the ruling class is trying to turn the Bible into this sort of nonsense book. Is that if they can't use it to justify slavery, they want to make it nonsense to the people. Because if people actually understood what the book is actually about, which is that with the power of culture, we can eradicate slave systems, that's what the book's actually about. That's what the story of Christ is actually about. That Christ's death and resurrection says, you can kill me, but you cannot kill the message. And that the message is, like Spartacus was saying, we will free the slaves. We will be free. And that the system of capital, the slave system of capital that persists today, will act in exactly the same way towards us. In exactly the same way. And you saw it tonight. What happened on TikTok? They silenced me. Well, first they silence. It won't be much longer now until it's not just silencing. It won't be much longer until it's not just silencing. Once labor was indirectly valued, control over labor of intimidation became the best way, efficiency to own labor. Yeah. It was probably masturbation or homosexuality for Paul. Maybe prostitution. I just don't get why people are so just like, we only got hens and a goat and a small amount of land. The ranch was made by my grandfather in the 60s. In the socialist times, we were more wealthy than now and happier. Theocratic socialism. So it sounds to me, QTYA, that, like, I think that you have to start changing your perspective. You're wealthier than you think you are. You own land. Like, you own land. I know that lots of people don't really understand that. But you own land. Like, do not sleepwalk through your life thinking that that is a small thing. Do not interact with this world while standing on land that you own, believing that you are poor. No. You own land. There are millions of people who do not own land. You own land. And I don't really even care how much. Do you know what I would do to have an acre of land? Do you know how badly I would love to have an acreage of land? With like a little shack on it? Like, that's what I would love more than anything else in my life. Small acreage of land, little shack on it, a connection to the power supply. Right? The system of capital doesn't permit it. So if you've got that, I consider you to be quite fortunate, quite lucky. Jesus didn't fight capitalists, he confronted the hierarchy. I mean, capitalism didn't exist until later, but like, the story of Christ in the temple, right? Like, that was the kickoff point for why he gets crucified, is that he walks into the temple, and there are these guys selling wildlife in the temple, and insisting that you weren't allowed to bring your own sacrifice, that you had to buy the animals that they were selling. That they made the statement that the sacrifices you brought to the temple were unclean. You had to buy clean animals, which were the ones that they were selling. So, of course, they were selling them at an inflated price. And this, of course, in Judean law at the time, is a crime. It's not permissible. You cannot do that. And so Christ upholds the law, the Judean law, and drives them out of the temple. And for the privilege, he gets crucified. And I've always loved the Thomas Sankara quote, which is, if Christ used violence in order to drive the merchants out, it's because he understood it's the only language they could speak and understand. And it's important to remember that in the crucifixion narrative, it's not like the Jews, the Pharisees and the Sadducees specifically, grabbed him and crucified him. They brought him in front of Pontius Pilate, right? And that Pontius Pilate, who is the Roman praetorium, right? He's the ruler of this section of Judea. He washes his hands of it, which is to say he makes no decision. He makes no proclamation. He doesn't allow there to be a trial of any sort. He doesn't hear Christ's side of the story. He just decides to allow. He just decides to ignore it and walk away from it, which is pretty sharp indictment of the empire, the callous nature of the empire. That it wasn't there to uphold justice or the law or anything. That it was willing to turn a blind eye. I've looked into so much ancient history lately and see stories as a way we passed info along. Jesus, real or not, became a legend like Robin Hood, man versus message, which is real anyhow. Yeah, John, you think that people couldn't free their slaves? I mean, I think that specific people could free their slaves under specific circumstances. Like, I think that a wealthy landowner could decide to free a slave, sure, right? I think that if the underclass started to put together a system of in order to undercut the economy and the power structure of the Roman Empire by finding ways to free themselves, I think that the Romans would respond to that. Like, they fought wars over it. Like, I just don't think they would watch it and be like, huh, clever. I just don't think that would happen. Jesus told the young capitalist rich prick ruler to go and sell everything he had and give it to the poor. Yep. They wanted to colonize northern parts of South Africa and Caribbean, create a new country. Your original point was that Jesus and the Bible were not good. Well, I mean, I just think, okay, so if that Jesus and the Bible were not good, like, I think that sort of more or less misses the point. Like, it's not about good, right? It's that they exist. Like, the story of Jesus and the story of the Bible are obviously persistent, powerful, popular stories, right? And they are that way for a reason, right? It's not about good. You know what I mean? Like, it's that they exist in the first place, and that by itself is a curiosity. Like, simple curiosity should lead you in that direction, to say, what the hell? What is this? How did this come to be? What is this? Why does this book exist at all? What is this? And I do think that a big reason why, I mean, it's become the Bible and Jesus have become idols of themselves. They've become like self-parodies in many ways. That the Christians don't care about Christ. I've said this before. Like, modern Christians, we're talking about modern Christians. They don't care at all about Christ. They don't care what he said. They don't care what he wrote. They don't care what he was doing. They don't care about the history of Christ. They don't care about the Roman Empire. They don't care about any of it. They don't care at all, which is why they're so hyper focused on the magic, right? That's why the magic is so hyper focused on that when stories get told about Christ, when they make a movie or when they make a video game, I've seen this. When they do that kind of thing, it's not his teachings. They're not trying to establish a world in which he lives in to create an understanding of what's actually going on. They tend to hyper focus on the magic, and then put Jesus on a hill somewhere and have him say one of the things that they're like okay with, you know. But it's sort of odd that the Jesus of the modern Christian right becomes this kind of banal nothing figure who stood for nothing, who made no proclamations of any sort, who didn't exist anywhere, who didn't fight against any people who had any beliefs of their own. That he really is just a wizard that did some magic, and the only time they actually look at anything that he had to say, it's to essentially do what you're doing, which is to decontextualize it, pretend like it's a commandment, and then use it as a justification for their own shittiness. Like, so, like, the idea that we're supposed to argue that, like, Jesus and the Bible are good or bad, it's such a nonsense way to begin the investigation. That they exist, and that should be far more than enough for us to be curious about it, and far more interested in it. Jabby, thank you for having these discussions. This is probably one of my favorite ones. Like, I think that what we are discussing, really, while we're discussing this conversation, is, like, this is a subsection of the larger system of capital. That, like, Christianity, and especially as we're moving towards Christian fascism, I think it's important for us, like, I actually think that every single Marxist should read and become experts in the Bible. Because we have ceded that territory to frauds, to obvious frauds, right? And anybody think that anybody on the Christian right is anything other than a fraud? Because I think that they're frauds. And I don't know why we're supposed to pretend as though these are the guys that are experts. Like, why are we pretending as though these obvious grifters and frauds are actually the experts in this Bible they don't read? And that we should not cede this territory. We shouldn't allow them to define the conversation. We shouldn't allow them to have quote-unquote expertise in a subject that they are illiterate in. That we should become the experts, and we should destroy them with their own book. Because if you actually read their own book, you find out very quickly that they're frauds. I actually make the statement that you only need to pick one of the Gospels. You don't need to do a big deep dive. You don't need to get very extensive. You just need to sort of have in your head an understanding of the Roman Empire, and then read Matthew or Mark or Luke or John. And Matthew is essentially a tax collector writing a diary. Mark is campfire stories told by Peter to Mark. Luke is a historian coming in afterwards, finding out what's this story everybody's talking about. He was commissioned to do so. And then John is the disciple Jesus loved. And so it's a true believer, right? Writing a series of love letters, essentially. And you can pick whichever one of those sounds the best to you as sort of the guidepost to the story of how to come in on the story. The most popular one that people seem to like the most is Luke, because it's the most thorough, because he was a guy that was actually commissioned to do it. So I think he thought that there was going to be a more persistent importance to it. So he was thorough. And so pick your poison, read it, and you'll find out after about 30 minutes, I don't think it's going to take you very long, to that the people who are walking around calling themselves Christians, pretending as though they give a shit about Christ, are frauds. It's not going to take you very long at all. that they are really banking on your illiteracy. They're really, really banking on the idea that you're not going to bother reading this thing. And they really, really bank on the general illiteracy of the public in order to continue the grift. That their congregations are primarily illiterate. Their congregations more or less cede literacy in that territory to the ruling class, which itself doesn't read the text and doesn't care to read the text, because that's not the reason why they're doing what they're doing. That the most dangerous thing to the Christian fascists would be a literate public, and which is why it's so important to make us illiterate. Like, what would be more dangerous to the capitalist death cult than a group of people walking around saying, wait a minute, we should love this world with all of our heart, and we should love our neighbor as if that neighbor was ourselves, even if they're trans, even if they're an immigrant. What would be more dangerous to the death cult than this? I can't think of anything more dangerous to the death cult than a group of people walking around saying, wait a minute, whoa, no, we're not going to poison the water, poison the land, poison the air. This is the reality that was created for us. We're going to cherish it. We're going to treasure it. We're going to make sure that it's good and solid to pass on to the next generation. What are you talking about? We're going to round up our immigrants. No, I love that guy as if I love myself. What are you talking about? We're going to go after trans people. No, I love that person as if it's myself. Maybe I don't understand, but that doesn't matter. Who cares about that? What would be more dangerous to the death cult than this? A society of people dedicated to each other and reality with such a degree of resolve. Nothing would be more dangerous to the capitalist death cult than this. So it's absolutely crucial to the capitalist death cult that nobody reads this book. That we are illiterate, moronic, and stupid, and that we cede all territory to obvious grifters and frauds. Because they cannot have somebody coming up and standing up and saying, hey, have you read this book? It's about a guy who existed during a period of time who said maybe we should give a shit about one another. Can't have it. It's got to go. And this is the way they're choosing to do it. Snake says, I also wanted to ask what your interpretation was on Engels advocating for in Origins of the Family. I believe it was an ethical monogamy based. I was like, can I be real straight with you guys? I have never read anything Engels wrote. I know. I think it is going to be my next pursuit. I think I am going to get some Frederick Engels and do some more Engels. Because I've done enough Marx. But Engels is just like totally zero, like not even one. So, God, we're all working on it, okay? Leave me alone. Yeah, we're getting to the end of this. I'm going to catch up with the chat, and then we're going to go. Ultimately, I think we're in like 95% agreement on Christianity. Yeah, I'd say that's right. But if anyone wants good references to the topic, I'd recommend Dr. Josh Bowen of Digital Hammurabi. He's written good books on slavery. Fantastic. Always good to know things. The commercialization of salvation, yeah. They commercialize salvation. Yeah, the Catholic Church got the best of this. Like one of the great, the reason why the Protestant Reformation happened, one of the reasons why the Protestant Reformation happened is because they were commercializing salvation. They were charging people. One of the very first things that was printed in the printing press, I think the first thing that was printed in the printing press was the Indulgences, which was a list of sins and the charge that you had to give to the church in order to be forgiven of those sins. I like it when your discussion gets existential and theological. Oh, thanks, Mr. Moon. I appreciate that. You know, that's actually quite encouraging. I get really worried that people don't like this. Because it is like it's a little off the mark, right? It's a little outside of what it is that I'm pitching. Like I'm the Canadian commie, I'm not the Canadian Christian, right? And I think that most Marxists sort of expect Marxism and Marxists to be atheists, and I'm not. Like, I just don't think I can be an atheist. I just don't think that's part of the fabric of my existence. That I don't see, like, I understand why people are atheists. Like, I understand it. And so I don't get mad at atheists. But I do think that, by and large, I feel that atheists are allowing shitty frauds to define things for them, more or less. And I understand that atheism is sort of a position. Oh, well, thank you, Snake. I appreciate that. Yeah, join the Patreon. What the hell? What the hell? Yeah, I know, Snake. I know. Yeah, I know, Rose. I know. Hey, Command Genius, how you doing? New PC. Like, I just can't get through. I've never once spoken to anyone who really wants to tackle the subject of, like, the God question in a way. Like, the only thing I ever get is sort of like a dismissal. I think that's all that I've ever experienced when I put forward my ideas, because I don't think that people know what to do with it. Like, that's what it is. I think people don't know what to do with it. I think that what I'm espousing is a different idea that most people haven't heard, and it's a different argument that most people haven't heard, and so they don't know what to do with it, and so they just kind of dismiss it. And I'll be real specific about what it is, which is that I think we've done ourselves a giant disfavor by asking the question, does God exist? I think that's a huge disfavor. Every time I've seen that discussion made, and it was especially indicative with the new atheists, it basically devolved into a definition of what God is, with a misunderstanding on both sides, really. And so it just ended up being two people misunderstanding one another the entire time, which was very frustrating. And so I no longer engage in that conversation, the does God exist conversation, and I prefer to get to the point, which is to ask the question, is the universe or reality sentient? I think that cuts to the chase a little bit more, because it puts the definition in the question and gets us over the sort of odd misunderstanding and the parody, I think, that atheists use. Like, the giant spaghetti monster was the moment when I really started to articulate it in a different way. Because the giant spaghetti monster is obviously a misunderstanding. It's a bad parody, right? It's taking the sort of trope of God as a man in the clouds and turning it into a giant spaghetti monster, which is itself a misunderstanding, right? So it's supposed to be a parody, but it sucks. It's a bad parody. And I don't really respect it. That every theologian I've ever read write on the subject of God understood that what we were talking about was the totality of all creation, that all things exist within the body of God, and that the spaghetti monster is a figure that exists within that, and also separate from it. So it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so the question, is the universe sentient? Is reality sentient? Is it conscious? I think cuts to the chase a lot faster, because it has in the question an acceptance that reality exists, an acceptance that the universe exists, an acceptance that the scientific understanding and the scientific definition of the universe exists, and but then asks a very simple question, and one that I think is very understandable, and one that I think is very reasonable to ask. Like, we accept that the universe exists. We accept that reality exists. We accept that we are here observing something and the nature of it and the scientific exploration of it and all that. We accept all of that and then just ask the simplest of questions. Is it also alive? Is the universe or reality also sentient, also alive, or also conscious? Whatever language we need to connect with that. Does it have a will of its own? Is it pursuing its own objectives? Does it make its own decisions? Is it alive? Is it alive? Well, thank you, Schizo. I appreciate that a lot. $10 donation, dude. Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. That's very nice of you. That's very kind. Thank you, bud. I'll answer your question in a bit, okay? I'm just going to finish this thought. We are running late, but, you know, I'm enjoying myself, so. And so the first question that somebody would ask me, and they're right to ask me, John is about to not speak correct on atheism. No, here we go. Here we go, Cotton. Because atheism is simply a not acceptance of gods, right? With the statement that, well, there's no evidence, and so things without evidence can be rejected without evidence. So the first question that anyone would rightly ask me would be, what's your evidence? Like, what's your evidence? And that is such an interesting question to ask, because the evidence is actually us. That human life itself is the evidence. Because if the question is the universe alive? Is the universe sentient? Does the universe have its own consciousness? Well, we are part of the universe, created by the universe, living within the universe. We are not separate from it, we are of it. And we insist that we are alive, and that we are conscious, and that we are sentient. So, by very tight logical, like A plus B equals C, if we are sentient, the universe must be at least as sentient as we are. It has to be. It can't not be. And it's no jump whatsoever to understand that the universe is as sentient as we all are. That it has a collective consciousness. And interestingly, during the 70s, the CIA did an enormous study on the concept of collective consciousness. And that the CIA has accepted the idea that there is a collective consciousness. And that if we have a collective consciousness, then so too must the universe have a collective consciousness. And so one of the things, if I want to get a little snide with when I say it, if people ask me, well, what's your evidence for your claim? I like to say, would you notice it if it waved right in front of your face? That what I think we are experiencing, what I think we are experiencing is a life form attempting to understand itself. That's what I think we are experiencing. That one of the things I think about is every single creature that comes into reality answers a simple question, which is, what am I capable of doing? A deer comes into reality and it begins to explore its legs and finds its feet very quickly. An insect comes into reality and it finds its wings and begins to move about and figures out what it's doing pretty much immediately. A human, because we come in very badly, comes in and we start to put fingers in our mouths and we develop very slowly. But the question that we are obviously seeking is, what am I capable of doing? Well, if you have a being or a life form, or an element, or whatever you want to call it, that comes into its own awareness, that is capable of creating all things that are possible to be created, then that's what it does. It doesn't plan it. It doesn't sort it out and then do it. It just does it. And it's only after it creates all things that are logically possible to be created that it turns around and says, what is it that I've created? And the only way it can experience the things that it's created is by experiencing it. By living each life. By being each life form. By being everything that exists and ever does exist. By going through the process of understanding itself, because it's the only thing that it can do. It's the only way it can do it. And so as I speak to you, and as you speak to me, and as we all speak to each other, we all speak with the voice of God. Because we all are God. We all are God. Each one of us with our own perspectives and our own ideas and our own thoughts and our own place in it, equally valid, equally important, and all equally part of the larger body that we understand to be God. That we are the universe attempting to understand itself. And that these constrictions we've put on one another, the system of capital that we've put on ourselves, is illusionary nonsense. It's people playing a game, misunderstanding the entire purpose of what it is we're doing here. Because if life has any meaning whatsoever, if there is any purpose whatsoever for us to be here, it is certainly to explore and learn more and to understand what it is we are doing. What is it that we are? What is it that we are doing? What is reality? And instead of exploring the world that we find ourselves on and learning more about the earth itself, let alone the universe and space around us, instead of doing that, we're all scrabbling around making drinks for one another so that we can have a house. The society that we have erected, without a doubt, is one of the most pathetic societies to have ever existed. And I use the word pathetic. We have all of this technology. We have all of this power. We produce far more food than we need. We have all of the housing that we could possibly want. We have all of these resources. We could be living in a life of total luxury so that we can actually get to the point of asking each other the question of, what is it we're here for? What is this place? What are the rules of it? How does it operate? And instead of having those conversations, we're all just scrabbling around, trying to justify our existences to a psychotic society. That's completely pathetic. And so when I get to the conversation of God, I don't view God as a being that exists above me, that I have to abide by rules or I'll go to hell or any of that kind of stuff. That I see God as a partner. That God doesn't know what's going on either. That this is the process by which God finds out about itself. That this is it. This is how it's figuring it out. That maybe in a big, larger meta sense it knows more, but it doesn't know that until it knows it. And this is it. This is it. And it's your partner. It's trying to figure it out too. And it needs your help. And the only way that you can help is if you send $1 to the address below. I had to. It was dangling right in front of me. I had to do it. It makes sense. It makes sense that frauds would get involved in this conversation. It makes sense. Because we really, really want it, I think, as people. And I think, Jade, you're sort of talking about it, right? Like the connection of energy, right? Energy travels between all things, right? Like we really want that larger spiritual connection, that interconnectivity, that collective consciousness. We want the connection not just to ourselves, but to the world around us. We want it. We crave it. We desire it. And capitalism has commodified it. And it couldn't commodify it if we didn't want it. And we obviously do. It's primordial. It's non-rational. It's deeply important to us. It's deeply, deeply important to us. It's the reason why I do this. I wouldn't do this if not for that. Right? If I was just an atomized individual, individualizing my individualism, and that's all I was, why would I do this? Unless I was a fraud. Because if I'm a fraud, and I just see this as a money-making scheme, then I'm fine taking advantage of people's needs and commodifying their existential desires. Right? Which I think is where a lot of atheists come from. And why there's an awful lot of atheism around now. And I understand it. Like I don't hate atheists at all. Quite the opposite. I think that when confronted with such a hysterical, pathetic culture such as ours, atheism is a very reasonable position to take. Because essentially all the atheist is doing is standing there saying, where's your evidence? And if you can't provide an argument, at least an argument, for that single question, where's your evidence? Then they're right to not pay attention to you. They're completely right to not pay attention to you. And I hope that my argument, yeah, we should be living in primitive Star Trek, really, yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, there's no reason food and shelter should not be free. Zero reason. Like, there's the only reason that's ever given is you gotta earn it, which is the most pathetic shit I've ever heard of in my life. What are you talking about? You've got to earn it. What's the point of having this system? What's the point? If, like, can you imagine? Like, we created a system that could feed and clothe and shelter everybody for free in perpetuity forever, but only if they prove it. What a psychotic idea. Like, what a psychotic idea that randomly generated beings need to pass a litmus test before they get access to food and shelter, which is freely available for anybody to have. Like, it's insane what we're doing. I think the need for connection and closeness can exist outside of spirituality. I feel like the love and connection and the want to see others improve is the true state of nature. Yeah, I think that, Jahoni, I think that's mainly semantic. like what you said there, that you just don't want to use the word spirituality, and you'd prefer to call it the true state of nature, and I think that's fine. I think that's completely fine. But like, that's the trouble with part of the trouble with what's going on in the discourse is that there is a lot of semantics. Like, again, I kind of bring up the new atheists, that a lot of the times they were just in semantic territory, right? Because there's many ways to come at this. There's many ways to come at this. Oh, Command Genius, you got it, my man. Sorry, I went down my rabbit hole. Marxism and religion is incompatible. I disagree, of course. Religion is idealist. Marxism is materialist. Marxism is materialist, certainly. I think religion is a tough one, right? Like, because there's too much. First of all, there's frauds in the conversation. Then you have the institutionalization of it all, which is another thing. Fundamentally, I think that what religion has always been trying to do is articulate what the hell is this place? Like, what is it that we're doing here? Like, what are the rules? Right? And it makes sense that pre-scientific, that pre-science, pre-enlightenment, they would do so badly. That makes all the sense in the world. So I think that Marxism has found a more successful way of articulating the world around it, but that I think that the pursuit and the pursuits that religion give us can merge very nicely with that. Like, the concept of God that I articulate is a scientific creature. It's a physical creature. It's not an abstract concept. That it's reality. And so when you are analyzing reality through a scientific or materialist lens, you are analyzing the body of God. Because God is all creation. It is what we're doing, and it is what we are. And so I don't think they're incompatible. I think they're made incompatible by frauds, is what I think happens. Content says, few, the new atheist movement was from a place of self-defense in response to theocratic notions. Yeah, I think that's right. No, you're right, though. Like, you have to respect what the new atheists were doing. That I think it's true to say that the new atheists were primarily illiterate on the subject, but that they didn't need to be, given the deep illiteracy and the deep stupidity of the people that they were talking to. That really all the new atheists were saying fundamentally is, what's your evidence? That's really all they were saying. What's your evidence? And most of the quote-unquote theologians that they were discussing didn't have a response to that. And if you don't have a response to that question, then you can be ignored and should be ignored. That the statement, one of the things that I'm really, really grateful for from the new atheist movement is the statement, and I don't remember which of them said it. I kind of feel like it's a Dennett statement, although Dawkins might have said it as well, which is the statement, that which is claims that are stated without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And that might even be Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan was part of the New Atheists, but you understand. That statement really has resonated with me in my life. That claims that are made without evidence can be rejected without evidence. And since that moment, my exploration in this sort of theological space has always ruddered up against it. That I've always asked myself, well, what is the evidence of this? Really? Like, what is the evidence of this? And as somebody, I do consider myself a theist, and I don't think I can ever not be. I think that and perhaps maybe somebody will find a way to get me through that, but I'm yet to find the person who actually wants to engage me with the idea that I have. And So it's always been very important to me to answer that evidence question. And I think I do have an answer to that evidence question. Because I think I do have a stronger understanding of the subject than the new atheists do. And I think I have found a way to articulate it in a way that's clearer than what I hear other people articulate it. That simply asking the question, is the universe alive, really cuts through a lot of it very, very quickly and gets to the question, to the core of it right away, which I rather am fond of. I'm rather fond of that. I would love to start having more conversations with people, with atheists. Like if I were to suddenly become an internet sensation and blow up across the world, one of the big conversations I would love to have with all kinds of people of all stripes is that question: is the universe alive? I don't give a shit about this. Does the universe does God exist? I think that's a pointless waste of time question that will take you hours and hours and hours to get through, and then you just end up into the point of, is the universe alive? And as soon as you get to that question, I think I would love to have a conversation with lots of people on that question, because I think it's actually important. Like, is the universe alive? Should we not be concerned about whether or not the earth that we reside on and the reality we persist in is a life form in and of itself? Do you think that we would be drilling holes in it so rapidly with such willy-nilly care? Do you think we'd be blowing it apart and destroying it if we actually understood that this thing might be alive even? That it's not just a dead, inert life, a dead, inert thing for us to harvest? Do you think maybe if we even had the suspicion that this place is alive, we might be a little more careful about what it is we're doing? You break the concept of a god and you undermine the theocrats' justification for their bullshit. Yeah. No, again, like I completely, this is why I think the New Atheist movement was largely positive in the end of it all. Like, I didn't agree with a lot of what they said in a lot of cases, but they were willing to, the reason why they have credibility in my eyes and always will, even someone like Harris, who I think is repugnant, the movement had credibility because they were doing what the Christian left will not, which is confront the Christian fascists, which is confront them and to call them out and to say that what you're doing is nonsense, because it is nonsense. What the Christian right is peddling is nonsense. And it did lead into interesting conversations with people on the Christian left. I think the one that's really stuck in my mind, because I think I watched most of those debates. Most of the debates that the New Atheists had, I watched most of them. And the one that has always stuck with me was the conversation that Dawkins had with Rowan Atkinson, the Archbishop of Canterbury of the Anglican Church. And Rowan Atkinson basically articulated what I have articulated, which is that we don't see God as like a man, as like a being, is that it's the force of all creation, that it's the creative force that underpins all things. And Dawkins didn't really know what to make of that, because I don't think it's something that gets talked about that often, because it doesn't sell. It's actually a dangerous idea to the death cult, right? That reality itself is alive and a life form that you can interact with, right? That there is a collective consciousness, that we should be concerned about one another, right? No, capitalists need us to be individualized and atomized. They don't need us to be collective and understand that the world is actually a collective organism, right? So, like, never mistake me. I think that the New Atheist movement was largely beneficial and largely positive. If only because they were willing to do what the kind of weak, cowardly Christian left refuses to do, which is to stand up and fight against the death cult. Yeah, I saw about this, dude. One of your friends invited you to a neo-Nazi Discord server. Brutal. Like, that's brutal, dude. Oh, somebody, Schizo, oh, sorry, dude. I should have got to this forever ago. You gave a $10 donation to ask opinions on Heart of Iron 4. Honestly, bud, if I had to be straight, I do think that the developers of that game really wanted to be Nazis. Like, I think they really, really wanted to create a pro-Nazi kind of a game. Straight up. Like, I think that there's a lot of fascist and Nazi glorification that happens in Heart of Iron. I think that they sort of successfully created an experience of war, and they created a strategy game that is successful. But I just think that, like, there's a I think there's a line that exists between creating something historical and creating something that glorifies, and I think that they are glorifying Nazism in Hearts of Iron. Like, anytime I tune in and anytime I look at it and anytime I watch it, I'm like, oh yeah, these guys love fascism. Like, they love it. They're all about it. Like, they're not just trying to create a historical reenactment, right? Like, these guys are like, Nazism is awesome. We should all be Nazis. That's more or less what I get from Hearts of Iron 4, which is concerning, especially considering that, like, Nazis lost. Like, the Nazis lost. They lost every fight they took. Like, I don't know why we're supposed to glorify these guys. Like, that's the thing that's, like, I love it when I see people who are like pro-Confederate, pro-Nazi. I'm like, so you are just a loser. Like, you are just a loser. Like, you the Confederates lost. The Nazis lost. Why did they lose? Because they were losers. Because their ideas were bad and that nobody wanted them. They couldn't get the public support. More people fought against them than fought for them. They weren't able. Their ideas are bad. Other ideas of how to run an economy are superior. Because ultimately, their idea is we should do nothing and get everything for it. It's a bad idea that doesn't work. Ideas like the people who do the work should keep the labors of their work are better. And that has borne out on the battlefield. And I take a look at a game like Hearts of Iron 4, and it does make me question the intention of the developer. Like, why did they make that game? Who is that game for? Who are they selling that game to? Who's playing that game? Why are you so interested in playing as the Nazis? Why are you so interested in exploring the idea of, well, what did the Nazis do wrong? How do we win that war? Interesting. Interesting that that's something that you're interested in pursuing. Let's go be Nazis and win a war, like the Nazis never did. Oh yeah, Florida, dude. Yeah, dude, that's why I think a space like this is so important, Command Genius. You know? Like, I'm the only person around me that thinks this way, right? Like, it's getting easier, but like, for me, a big reason why I have to do this podcast or stream or whatever you want to call it, the big reason why I have to do it, is because I inflict this on other people. And most people are, the word that I would use is accommodating for a while. Like, for a minute. Most people will accommodate it for a bit. But they don't want to be around a person like this. Like, they don't want to spend much time around a person like this. And if I don't do this, if I don't have an outlet, like this, then I can't really live in the world. I can't really
hang out with friends. I can't really spend time with people. You know, I can't really have a girlfriend, right? Unless they're just willing to bear the brunt of it. But it is a brunt, and it is a burden on them, without a doubt. Like, no doubt at all. And so, by doing this, by creating this space where I just hit record, and you guys are here voluntarily, you walk in the door yourselves. It lets me get it all out off my chest. It lets me explore these ideas in this space freely myself, and it means that when I'm out in the world interacting with people, I don't feel like I need to get this out there, because I am getting it out there. I am getting it out there. And could I maybe be doing better organizing locally? Yes. And in fact, I'm going to remove the word maybe. I could be doing better organizing locally, which I think we all have to start doing seriously as soon as possible. We all have to find it in our hearts. And I think maybe I should start doing that with a little bit more veracity, a little bit more seriousness. That I've got to find a location, local pub, church maybe even. I've got to set a date. 1st of the month makes sense. Got to set a time. 7 o'clock makes sense, right? So 1st of the month, 7 o'clock at this location. Communists come, gather. And I actually think that that's very important, because if you're not, like, what we're doing here, I think is good in terms of existential catharsis, in terms of not feeling alone. That someone like yourself, Command Genius or Snake, you might feel very isolated and alone. But we are getting to the point where we need to begin organizing locally, because the system is devolving. The system is devolving, and it's not going to recover. It's not going to recover. That we are going to be in a position as a people where we are going to be isolated, where its individual towns are going to be told to fend for themselves. Individual towns are already being told to fend for themselves. When a company rolls a tanker full of explosive chemicals through your town, and it falls over and blows up into the sky and poisons everything around it, and you get given, what, $25,000 for it, you are being told to fend for yourself. We have to begin organizing locally. We have to. We have to. Because this is going to get worse. The abandonment is going to get swifter. The systems that are supposed to be in place in order to look out for the well-being of the nation are corrupted and are abandoning us. Full scale, that they are putting burdens onto us, not the other way around. They are not alleviating our burdens, they are increasing our burdens, because they see us as a battery for their system. And once we are drained, their plan is to simply take us out and discard us. We have to begin organizing locally. I have to begin organizing locally. I know exactly how to do it. It's just about finding the place. And so that's what I'm going to set myself to do. And what I hope many of you also do is set yourself and find a place, a location, a pub, a church, a local business, someone who's sympathetic. And once that's set up, once a month meeting, just 1st of the month, 7 o'clock. Make it easy on yourself. Make it easy on everybody. 1st of the month, 7 o'clock. Come if you can. Just book the day off. It's the 1st of the month. It's easy. And start finding the people around you who are ready to abandon this system back. Ready to abandon this system back. because it's coming. Sooner than we think. Sooner than we like. Communist beer hall pushed. Yeah, 2024. Am I doing this in Toronto? I hope to. I hope to. I mean, I am in Toronto. I know that there are many people out there who listen who are from Toronto. So maybe we can actually get together. And remember, it's us versus the system. Yeah, only France had the balls to organize en masse. The rest of the Western nations still not followed suit, even though they all suffer from unfettered capitalism. Yeah, I think we're all just exhausted. I think we're exhausted, and we don't know what to do. Man, I want some hot chips. Fantastic, Jade. There we go. We already got one. All right, guys. I'm way over time. Way over time. I'm going to go get some chips myself, I think. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. Revolt. Rebel. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.